I was standing in my kitchen with divorce papers in my hand when the front door swung open. The husband of my cheating husband's mistress walked in and dropped a $10 million check on my kitchen counter. He looked me dead in the eye and told me to wait exactly 3 more months before divorcing him. My name is Nia. I am 34 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to play the long game to get the justice you truly deserve. I am a senior corporate auditor. For the last 10 years, I have built my entire career out of spotting financial discrepancies, balancing complex books, and catching powerful people in their lies. But the absolute biggest fraud I ever uncovered was living right inside my own home. My husband Darius is a city councilman currently running for mayor of Atlanta. To the public, he is the ultimate family man. He is a pillar of the community who speaks passionately about family values, integrity, and building a future for the next generation. He desperately wants to cement his place among Atlanta's elite. But behind closed doors, he is a parasite. He built his entire political platform on my paycheck, my pristine credit score, and my endless sacrifices. It was a Tuesday evening. The marble island in our kitchen felt cold against my hands as I set down a thick manila envelope. 2 leather suitcases sat perfectly packed by the hallway. Darius walked through the door unknotting his expensive silk tie, complaining loudly about his campaign manager. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the suitcases. Then his eyes drifted and he saw the divorce papers resting next to my favorite coffee mug. I did not yell. I did not cry. Crying is for people who do not have solid evidence. Instead, I reached into the envelope and slid a stack of 8 by 10 glossy photographs across the smooth marble counter. They fanned out perfectly like a deck of cards. There was Darius walking into the Four Seasons Hotel. There was Darius holding a glass of premium champagne on a private balcony. And there was Chloe, the 29-year-old socialite wife of his biggest campaign donor, wrapped tightly in his arms. Her signature red manicured hands were tangled in his shirt. Darius stared at the photos. The color completely drained from his face. His charismatic politician smile vanished instantly, replaced by the panicked look of a man who just realized his entire life was about to collapse. He opened his mouth to speak, but the lies stalled in his throat. "Nia, please," he stammered, taking a slow step toward me. "This is not what it looks like." It was a momentary weakness. "She means absolutely nothing to me." I held up my hand to stop him. "Do not insult my intelligence, Darius. I am an auditor. I track patterns for a living. I tracked your missing hours. I tracked the unexplained mileage on your luxury car. I know all about the expensive hotel rooms. I know about the private dinners you charged to your secret credit card. You are incredibly sloppy. Sign the papers. I am leaving tonight, and by tomorrow morning the local press will have high-resolution copies of everything on this counter." Darius panicked. He lunged forward, trying to sweep the photos off the counter to hide them from his own eyes. "You cannot do this, Nia. My mayoral announcement is in exactly 3 weeks. This will ruin my campaign. This will completely ruin my life." "Your life is not my concern anymore," I replied coldly. "I am liquidating our shared assets. I am taking my name off your campaign accounts. You are entirely on your own." He reached out to grab my arm, but before his fingers could even graze my sleeve, the heavy oak front door swung open. We had not heard a luxury car pull up. We had not heard footsteps on the front porch. But suddenly there he was, Sterling. Sterling is 42 years old and a billionaire in the private equity sector. He is also Chloe's husband and the primary financial backer, keeping Darius's entire mayoral campaign afloat. Sterling is a man who operates entirely in the shadows. He does not raise his voice. He does not make threats he cannot immediately back up. He simply shifts vast amounts of money and ruins lives. He stepped into our bright foyer wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, looking completely unbothered by the fact that he was walking right into a domestic war zone. He did not knock. He just let himself in as if he owned the place. Darius froze. His hands dropped awkwardly to his sides. "Sterling, what are you doing here, man?" Darius asked, his voice cracking heavily with fear. Sterling did not even look at him. He walked straight past Darius, treating him like a piece of cheap furniture. He stepped up to the kitchen island right across from me. He looked down at the official divorce papers. He looked at the glossy photos of his own wife kissing my husband. His expression did not change. Not a single muscle in his jaw twitched. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a crisp piece of paper, and dropped it directly on top of the divorce papers. It was a cashier's check. My trained eyes immediately scanned the numbers printed across the center. 1000000. $10 million. It was made out entirely to me. "Do not divorce him yet," Sterling said. His voice was deep calm and terrifyingly steady. I looked from the massive checkup to Sterling's face. "What exactly is this?" I asked, keeping my voice as level as his. "This is a deposit for your patience," Sterling replied. "I need exactly 90 days. Keep playing the perfect supportive wife. Smile for the cameras. Stand by his side at the upcoming galas. Do not leak these photographs, and do not file those legal papers. Wait 3 more months." Darius suddenly found his fake political courage. He puffed out his chest and marched over to the island, trying to reclaim his territory. "Now hold on a second, Sterling. You cannot just walk into my house and disrespect me like this. You cannot pay my own wife to stay with me. I am a city councilman. I am going to be the mayor of Atlanta. Get out of my house right now." Sterling finally turned his head to look at Darius. The silence in the kitchen became incredibly suffocating. Sterling's eyes were like pure ice. "You are nothing," Sterling said softly. "You are a terrible investment. You are a man playing dress-up in tailored suits your wife paid for, running a desperate campaign fueled entirely by my money. If I make one phone call right now, your campaign goes completely bankrupt before midnight. Your wealthy donors will pull out. Your dedicated staff will quit. And those photos will be on the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution by sunrise. Do not ever raise your voice at me again." Darius swallowed hard, taking a slow step backward. His bravado shattered into a million tiny pieces. He looked down at the hardwood floor, completely humiliated in his own kitchen. Sterling turned his attention back to me. "Well, Nia," he asked calmly, "do we have a deal?" I stared down at the $10 million check. $10 million was more than enough to change a life forever. It was enough to walk away right now and never look back at this mess. But as a senior auditor, I knew the strict boundaries of the law. Taking a massive, undocumented sum of money from a billionaire in exchange for silence regarding a scandalous affair was a legal disaster waiting to happen. It could easily be classified as extortion. It could be framed legally as blackmail. If Sterling ever decided to turn his lawyers on me, that piece of paper would be the exact evidence that sent me to federal prison. I pushed the check back across the marble island. "No." Darius let out a loud breath of relief, clearly thinking I was defending our sacred marriage. Sterling just tilted his head slightly, waiting patiently for my explanation. "I am an auditor, Sterling," I said calmly. "I do not take dirty hush money, and I absolutely do not participate in extortion schemes. If I deposit that check tomorrow, I become a severe liability to myself. I will not give you or anyone else illegal leverage over my personal freedom." A faint smile appeared on Sterling's face. It was the very first sign of genuine respect he had shown since walking in. "Then what do you propose?" he asked. I reached for my designer leather briefcase resting on a bar stool. I pulled out a blank yellow legal pad and my favorite heavy fountain pen. I slid them across the cold counter toward him. "If you want my services for the next 90 days, you will hire me legally," I told him. "You run a massive private equity firm. You acquire distressed corporate assets, and you frequently need corporate risk assessment. You will write out a formal binding contract right here on this pad. You will state clearly that your firm is retaining my independent auditing services to investigate high-level corporate risk and financial mismanagement. The $10 million is my non-refundable retainer fee. I will sign it. You will sign it. It becomes a clean, legal, and fully taxable business transaction." Sterling stared at me for a long, heavy moment. He looked at the yellow legal pad, then at the silver pen. He slowly picked up the pen. "You are significantly smarter than he is," Sterling said, referring to Darius without even bothering to look at him. "Atlanta is really going to miss out on a brilliant first lady." Sterling began to write. He drafted the consulting contract perfectly using precise legal terminology. He outlined the retainer, the strict confidentiality clause, and the exact timeline. 90 days. When he finished, he signed his name with a sharp, aggressive stroke and turned the pad back toward me. I read over every single word carefully. It was completely airtight. I signed my name confidently at the bottom, picked up the cashier's check, and folded it neatly into my jacket pocket. "The clock starts today," Sterling said. "Keep him comfortable. Keep him totally oblivious. I will be in touch." Without another word, Sterling turned around and walked out of the house. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, leaving a deafening silence in the room. Darius stood frozen in the hallway. He looked absolutely terrified. The entire power dynamic in our marriage had just violently shifted, and he knew it. He had lost the respect of his primary donor, and he was completely at the mercy of my silence. He slowly walked back toward the kitchen island, looking at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Nia," he started, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "What does this mean? What are we going to do now?" I did not answer him right away. I calmly picked up the stack of glossy photographs and slid them back into the thick manila envelope. I picked up the divorce papers and locked them securely inside my briefcase. I walked over to the hallway, grabbed the heavy handles of my 2 packed suitcases, and rolled them confidently back toward the master bedroom. I stopped at the doorway and looked back at my husband. He was sweating heavily, his silk shirt clinging wetly to his back. "I am staying," I said smoothly. "I will put on the expensive designer dresses. I will smile brightly at your fundraisers. I will shake hands warmly with your voters. I will play the perfect supportive political wife for exactly 90 days. Darius let out a massive sigh of relief, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Thank you, Nia. I promise I will make this right. I will end it with Chloe today. We can fix this marriage." I laughed, a cold, hollow sound that made him flinch visibly. "You misunderstand me, Darius. We are not fixing anything. You are going to do exactly as you are told. You will not question my schedule. You will not touch my bank accounts. You will sleep alone in the guest room. If you step out of line, if you breathe wrong in my direction, I will break this contract and I will destroy your life faster than Sterling ever could." Darius nodded quickly, completely broken. "Yes. Okay. Whatever you want." I smiled. "Good. Now go make yourself useful and carry these heavy suitcases back upstairs. I have a lot of work to do." The very next afternoon, the heavy scent of baked macaroni and cheese and roasted chicken filled the lower level of my house. It was Sunday. Sunday dinner is not just a meal, it is an absolute institution. It is a time for family to gather and break bread. But in my house, Sunday dinner was nothing more than a weekly feeding trough for my husband's parasitic relatives. At exactly 4 o'clock, the front door banged open violently. There was no doorbell ring, and absolutely no polite knocking beforehand. Keisha and Trey treated my 5,000-square-foot home in Buckhead like their personal clubhouse. Keisha is 38 and changes business ventures as often as she changes designer wigs. She wore a silk jumpsuit bought with the platinum credit card I gave her for emergencies. Trey is 32. He calls himself an entrepreneur despite his last 3 startups collapsing, leaving me to cover legal fees to prevent fraud charges. Darius was sitting quietly in the living room, pretending to review his political campaign notes on his laptop. He looked completely exhausted. He had spent the entire night tossing and turning in the guest room exactly as I ordered him to do. When his demanding siblings walked in, he forced a tight and incredibly fake smile. Keisha dropped her oversized leather tote bag onto my pristine marble kitchen counter. She did not say hello to me. She did not ask how my week was. She just peered right over my shoulder into the hot oven and visibly wrinkled her nose in extreme disgust as the heat rushed out. "Are you using the sharp cheddar? Or that cheap mild stuff?" she asked. Her voice was dripping with absolute condescension. "Because the last time you made this dish, it was incredibly dry, Nia. You know Darius prefers his food to be creamy and rich. A good supportive wife knows exactly how her powerful husband likes his meals prepared. I calmly closed the heavy oven door. I did not take the obvious bait. I simply wiped my hands on a clean kitchen towel and looked directly at her. It is an old family recipe I learned from my grandmother Keisha. If it does not meet your incredibly high culinary standards, you are more than welcome to order takeout food. With your own hard-earned money, of course. Keisha scoffed loudly and aggressively flipped her hair. Well, excuse me for trying to be helpful, she snapped back. Some women actually appreciate honest, constructive criticism. In fact, my good friend Chloe was just telling me yesterday how important elegant presentation is. She reached deep into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a brand new pale pink Prada clutch. She set it down firmly on the kitchen island, right in the exact spot where the divorce papers had been sitting 24 hours earlier. Have you seen this beautiful bag, Nia? She asked with a malicious smirk. Chloe gifted it to me yesterday when we had a lovely lunch at the exclusive country club. She is so incredibly generous to the people around her. She really understands how to treat people she cares about. Keisha continued. She was intentionally testing my patience. Keisha knew exactly who Chloe was. She knew all about the secret affair. In fact, she was practically acting as their personal cheerleader in the shadows. She honestly thought she was completely untouchable because she was the older sister of Darius. She thought I was just the clueless workaholic wife paying all the household bills, while her charming brother lived his absolute best life behind my back. Just then, Trey walked into the bright kitchen, spinning a shiny set of car keys on his right index finger. He walked straight over to the large stainless steel refrigerator without asking permission. He pulled out a cold bottle of imported sparkling water and twisted the cap off. Hey Nia, I am going to need the keys to the black Range Rover tonight, he announced casually. I have a very important dinner date with this gorgeous fitness model from Instagram, and I absolutely cannot show up driving my old beat-up Honda. It totally ruins my luxury brand image. I turned away from the warm stove and looked right at him. No, you cannot have my keys. Trey laughed out loud like I had just told a genuinely hilarious joke. Come on, Nia, do not be like that, he whined, taking a long sip of his sparkling water. Darius already told me yes. He said, what belongs to his lovely wife belongs to the entire family. Right, Darius? He called out loudly toward the living room, fully expecting his older brother to immediately rush in and back him up against me. Darius slowly walked into the kitchen, dragging his feet. He looked absolutely terrified. He looked at me, then he nervously looked at his younger brother. Trey, maybe you should just take an Uber tonight, he muttered quietly, keeping his eyes glued to the hardwood floor. Keisha slammed her manicured hand down hard on the marble counter. An Uber, she yelled. Are you being serious right now, Darius? You are actually going to let this stubborn woman humiliate your own flesh and blood. You are the supposed man of this house. You are about to be the next mayor of Atlanta, for crying out loud. Tell your disobedient wife to hand over the damn car keys right now. She is just being incredibly spiteful because she works 80 boring hours a week and does not know how to actually enjoy her miserable life. Instead of arguing back or raising my voice, I calmly reached over to the charging station on the counter and picked up my silver iPad. I unlocked the bright screen and quickly opened my secure mobile banking application. I tapped the glass screen once. I tapped it twice. Then I looked up at the two greedy parasites standing in my home. The baked macaroni and cheese is almost ready, I said, using my most professional corporate voice. But before we all sit down at the dining table to eat, I have a few quick administrative financial updates to share with the family. Trey, I am definitely not giving you the keys to my expensive Range Rover because you officially no longer have any active auto insurance. I just permanently canceled the monthly policy I was generously paying for on your dusty Honda. You have exactly 10 business days to find a brand new insurance provider before the state transportation department automatically suspends your driving license. Trey completely stopped spinning his keys. His mouth fell wide open in absolute shock. What did you say? You cannot possibly do that to me, he stammered. I turned my undivided attention directly to Keisha, who was glaring at me. Keisha, I absolutely love the brand new Prada bag. It is truly stunning craftsmanship. I sincerely hope it can hold a whole lot of hard cash because you are desperately going to need it starting tomorrow. I just successfully logged into the American Express corporate portal and permanently closed the supplementary platinum credit card you have been freely using for the past 2 years. Keisha's eyes went incredibly wide with sudden panic. You did what to my card? She shrieked. You cannot do that, Naya. That is my primary business expense card for my hair company. No, Keisha, that is my personal credit line that you consistently use to buy expensive designer wigs and fancy country club lunches with your brother's cheap mistress. I corrected her smoothly without blinking. And speaking of important business matters, I also contacted the mortgage bank this morning regarding the luxury townhouse you currently live in, the exact same property where I foolishly co-signed the initial mortgage loan. I officially requested a full financial review to aggressively remove myself as the primary guarantor. Since you have carelessly missed the last 3 consecutive monthly payments, the bank will be contacting you directly on Monday morning to demand the entire outstanding balance immediately. If you cannot pay the required funds, they will officially begin aggressive foreclosure proceedings by the end of this current month. The large kitchen went completely dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the stainless steel refrigerator. Keisha stared as if I had grown a second head. Then the shock wore off, and pure rage set in. Her face twisted into a truly ugly mask of fury as she whipped her head around to face her silent brother. Darius, she screamed at the top of her lungs. Are you going to stand there like a coward and let this miserable witch treat your loving family like absolute garbage? Put her in her rightful place right now. Tell her to turn the credit cards back on and fix the mortgage issue immediately. She is intentionally trying to destroy my entire life because she is a jealous, bitter woman. Darius looked at Keisha. He looked at Trey, who was still frozen in shock. Then he slowly looked at me standing tall and completely unbothered. He vividly remembered the $10 million contract signed just yesterday. He remembered the highly incriminating photographs locked securely inside my heavy leather briefcase. He knew perfectly well that if he dared to cross me right now, he would be sleeping outside in a wet cardboard box by tomorrow morning. Darius took a very deep, trembling breath. Keisha, shut your mouth, he snapped sharply. His voice was suddenly loud, but it lacked any real genuine authority. Both of you just shut up right now. Get your things and get out of my house immediately. Keisha gasped loudly, stepping back as if her brother had physically struck her across the face. You are choosing this horrible woman over your own flesh and blood, she screamed hysterically. Darius pointed a shaking finger directly toward the open front door. I said get out! He repeated, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. Keisha violently grabbed her Prada bag and stormed out with Trey following closely behind her. She stopped abruptly at the door, glaring back with pure venom. This is not over, Nia, she hissed. You just started a family war you cannot possibly win. The heavy front door slammed shut. I smiled to myself, knowing they were completely out of ammunition. 2 weeks passed since that disastrous Sunday dinner. The atmosphere inside my home was thick with unspoken tension. Darius was walking on eggshells, acting like a terrified ghost, haunting his own expensive hallways. He slept quietly in the guest room, exactly as I instructed. He went to his political campaign office, came straight home, and barely spoke above a nervous whisper. He actually believed he had the entire situation under complete control. He thought if he just kept his head down and played the role of the compliant husband, I would eventually soften and forgive him. He severely underestimated my memory, and he severely underestimated the sheer greed of his own family. I knew his older sister Keisha was not going to give up that easily. Her lavish lifestyle had just been violently cut off. She was angry, she was broke, and most importantly, she was desperate. A desperate person makes incredibly sloppy mistakes. I knew Keisha would actively try to find leverage against me. She needed to prove to Darius that I was entirely bluffing about the divorce. She wanted to convince him that I did not have any real power, so he could confidently leave me secure his financial future and publicly upgrade his life with Chloe. I decided to make it incredibly easy for her to fall into my trap. On a quiet Tuesday morning, I woke up early and put on my sharpest tailored suit. I loudly announced to Darius in the kitchen that I had an intensive all-day off-site meeting with the senior partners at my auditing firm. I told him I would be completely unreachable by phone until late in the evening. I packed my heavy leather briefcase, kissed him coldly on the cheek, and backed my black Range Rover out of the driveway. But I did not drive to the downtown financial district. Instead, I drove exactly 3 blocks away to a quiet neighborhood coffee shop. I ordered a black coffee, sat at a small corner table, and opened the hidden home security application on my phone. It only took 45 minutes for the silent alert to pop up on my screen. A motion sensor had been triggered inside my private home office. I tapped the notification and watched the live high-definition video feed. Keisha had used the emergency spare key that Darius carelessly kept hidden inside his golf bag in the garage. She crept into my pristine office wearing oversized designer sunglasses and a dark hooded sweatshirt. She looked like a ridiculous amateur burglar trying to break into a bank. She immediately went straight for my heavy oak desk. She yanked open the top drawers, frantically tossing my perfectly organized client files onto the floor. She did not care about the mess she was making. She was desperately searching for the signed divorce papers or the incriminating photographs of her brother. When she found nothing but blank stationery, corporate tax summaries, and spare charging cables, she grew visibly frustrated. She slammed the drawers shut and turned her attention to my silver laptop, sitting directly in the center of the desk. I watched her open the lid and eagerly begin typing in passwords. She tried my birthday. She tried Darius's birthday. She even tried our wedding anniversary. Every single attempt flashed a bright red error message across the screen. After her 5th failed attempt, the laptop automatically locked itself down, activating the secondary webcam. I received a crystal clear snapshot of her angry, panicked face sent directly to my email. I took a slow sip of my coffee, stood up, and walked calmly back to my car. I drove back to the house, parked silently in the driveway, and unlocked the front door without making a single sound. I walked softly down the long carpeted hallway. I could hear Keisha muttering angrily to herself, cursing my name under her breath as she aggressively clicked the locked trackpad. I stepped into the doorway of my office and leaned casually against the wooden frame. "Are you looking for something specific, Keisha?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. Keisha jumped so hard she nearly knocked my expensive laptop right off the edge of the desk. She spun around, her eyes wide with absolute panic behind her oversized sunglasses. She ripped the glasses off her face and clutched her chest, trying to force her breathing to slow down. Her mind raced as she tried to come up with a believable lie. "Nia," she gasped, taking a quick step back. "I thought you were at work all day. I was just looking for a pen. I needed to write down a quick note for Darius, and I could not find one in the kitchen." "Do you normally search for a simple pen by trying to hack into a highly encrypted corporate laptop?" I asked, raising a single eyebrow. The initial panic in her eyes quickly hardened into defensive rage. Keisha realized she was caught red-handed, so she decided to drop the innocent victim act completely. She squared her shoulders and glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are completely bluffing," she snapped, stepping away from the desk and crossing her arms over her chest. "You do not have any real power here, Nia. You are just trying to scare my brother because you know he is entirely done with you. I know exactly what you are hiding. You do not have any signed divorce papers. You do not have any evidence. You are just a bitter, controlling woman holding him hostage with your money." I stood perfectly still, letting her empty words hang in the air. "Chloe is 10 times the woman you are," Keisha continued, her voice growing louder and more aggressive. "She actually supports his political vision. She comes from a real family with real influence. She is going to make a much better First Lady of Atlanta than you ever could. You are just a boring, miserable auditor who does not know how to keep a powerful man happy. He deserves someone who actually loves him, not someone who treats him like a financial liability." I did not yell back. I did not match her hysterical energy. Getting loud is what weak people do when they run out of facts. I walked slowly into the room, picked up my laptop, and gently closed the lid. Then I reached over to the tall metal filing cabinet sitting in the dark corner of the room. I unlocked the heavily reinforced bottom drawer with a small brass key from my pocket and pulled out a thick, bright red folder. I dropped the heavy folder right onto the center of the wooden desk. It made a loud, solid thud that made Keisha flinch involuntarily. I am a senior corporate auditor, Keisha, I said softly, looking directly into her angry eyes. Do you honestly think I would leave sensitive legal documents lying around in an unlocked desk drawer for a desperate, greedy woman to find? I slowly opened the red folder. Inside was a neatly printed, meticulously organized dossier. I flipped to the very first page and spun it around so she could see it clearly. What is that? She asked, her voice suddenly dropping a full octave as her bravado began to crack. It is your absolute financial ruin, I replied smoothly, tracing my finger over the top line of text. This is a complete unredacted record of the fraudulent tax returns you filed for your fake luxury hair care business over the past 4 consecutive years. You claimed over $250,000 in fake business losses to illegally avoid paying your federal income taxes. You wrote off luxury vacations, designer clothes, and expensive dinners as corporate expenses. Keisha stared at the highlighted numbers on the page. All the aggressive color rapidly drained from her face. But that is not even the worst part. I continued, turning to the second page. You also used a stolen social security number belonging to a deceased relative to register your secondary limited liability company in the state of Delaware. You committed federal wire fraud to secure a small business loan that you immediately spent on personal luxury items. She looked like she was going to be physically sick. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. How did you get this? She finally whispered, her hands beginning to tremble. I manage the household finances, Keisha, I reminded her coldly, which means I had to actively audit and cover up your incredibly sloppy paper trail so the federal government would not investigate my husband by association. I protected you because you were legally my family. But you are no longer my family. You are a severe legal liability to my peace of mind. I closed the red folder and tapped my perfectly manicured fingernail against the thick cardboard cover. One single phone call to the Internal Revenue Service, Keisha. That is all it takes. They will freeze your personal bank accounts by Friday morning. They will seize your fake inventory. They will take your cars. And you will face a minimum of 5 years in a federal prison for tax evasion, identity theft, and wire fraud. Keisha began to shake violently. Large tears welled up in her eyes and spilled rapidly down her cheeks, completely ruining her expensive makeup. The arrogant, confident woman from 30 seconds ago was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified criminal facing the absolute destruction of her life. Nia, please, she begged, reaching out a trembling hand across the desk. You cannot do this to me. I will lose absolutely everything. I am your sister-in-law. Please do not send that folder. I will do whatever you want. You are a parasite. I corrected her, stepping back so she could not touch me. Pack your bags today. I want you completely out of that townhouse by the end of the week. Do not ever step foot inside my home again. Do not call my husband. Do not ask him for a single dime. If I ever see your face near my property again, or if you ever speak my name in public, I will send this red folder directly to the federal authorities via overnight certified shipping. Do you understand me? Keisha sobbed openly, nodding her head in total defeat. She could not even form words anymore. She grabbed her oversized sunglasses from the desk and practically ran out of the office. I listened to her frantic footsteps echo down the hardwood hallway, followed by the familiar sound of the front door opening and slamming shut. I walked over to the large bay window and pulled back the sheer curtain. I watched her stumble down the driveway toward her car. She was aggressively wiping her wet face with the sleeve of her hoodie, looking absolutely pathetic. Once she got inside her car, she did not immediately start the engine and drive away. She pulled out her cell phone and began typing furiously with shaking hands. Thanks to the secure family plan I still actively managed on our shared cellular network, I had full administrative access to the data logs. I turned back to my desk and opened the tracking application on my iPad. I could see exactly who she was messaging in real time. She was texting Chloe. The text message popped up clearly on my bright screen. The witch is on to you. Take her down tonight. I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment. Take her down tonight. I actually smiled. Keisha was incredibly predictable, and Chloe was incredibly arrogant. They thought they were playing a game of chess. But they did not even know the rules. Tonight was the annual mayoral fundraising gala in Buckhead. It was the most important political event of the season and the exact place where Chloe planned to execute her ridiculous revenge. Darius had been begging me to attend this gala all week. He needed me there. He needed the wealthy donors of Atlanta to see the perfect supportive wife standing firmly by his side. If I did not show up, the rumors would start flying and his campaign would suffer. I agreed to go, but not to support him. I went because I knew Chloe would be there and I wanted a front row seat to her stupidity. Getting ready for the gala was an exercise in extreme patience. I slipped into a stunning emerald green evening gown that fit me perfectly. It was understated but incredibly expensive. Darius walked into the master bedroom adjusting his tuxedo bow tie. He looked at me nervously, then reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a long velvet jewelry box and handed it to me. "I wanted you to wear this tonight," he said, offering a weak smile. "Consider it a peace offering." I opened the box. Inside, resting on black satin, was a heavy diamond necklace. It sparkled under the bedroom lights, but to my trained eye, something was completely off. The cut was slightly too uniform. The light refraction lacked the deep fire of genuine stones. It was a very high-quality cubic zirconia decoy. Darius had bought me a fake necklace to keep me happy while he spent a fortune on his mistress. "It is beautiful, Darius." I lied smoothly, taking the necklace and clasping it around my neck. "Thank you so much." He let out a visible breath of relief, completely unaware that I had already appraised the fake jewelry and mentally added it to the long list of his betrayals. We rode to the event in absolute silence. The Buckhead Gala was held in a massive grand ballroom, decorated with cascading white orchids and towering ice sculptures. The room was packed with the political and financial elite of Atlanta. There were real estate developers, local celebrities, and old money families all mingling under enormous crystal chandeliers. Waiters carrying silver trays of champagne wove through the crowd. I stood next to Darius as he aggressively shook hands and delivered his fake political smile to anyone holding a checkbook. Then the heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open and the energy in the room completely shifted. Chloe had arrived. She was not trying to blend in. She wore a skin-tight, backless red designer dress that screamed for attention. Every head in the room turned to look at her. But my eyes did not focus on the inappropriate dress. My eyes went straight to her neck. Resting against her collarbone was the exact same diamond necklace Darius had just given me, except hers was catching the light of the chandeliers with a brilliant, blinding fire. Hers was the real one. I felt a cold wave of absolute disgust wash over me. Darius had spent at least $50,000 on real diamonds for his mistress and gave his legal wife the cheap replica. I glanced over at Darius. He was staring at Chloe and gulping nervously, clearly terrified that I would notice the matching jewelry. He quickly looked away and pretended to be deeply interested in a conversation with a local judge. Chloe saw me looking. A wicked, triumphant smirk spread across her face. She had received Keisha's desperate text message, and she was ready to make her move. She thought wearing the real necklace in front of me was a massive power play. She wanted to publicly humiliate me and assert her dominance. I excused myself from Darius and walked slowly toward the back of the room where a massive ice sculpture of the Atlanta city skyline stood, surrounded by an elaborate seafood buffet. I wanted to give her a clear target. I knew she would not be able to resist cornering me. Within 2 minutes, I heard the sharp click of her expensive heels approaching behind me. "Well, if it isn't the invisible wife," Chloe said, her voice dripping with venom. She stepped right next to me, holding a large crystal glass filled to the brim with dark red wine. "Hello, Chloe," I replied, not bothering to turn around and look at her. I picked up a small appetizer plate and calmly inspected a shrimp. "You are looking incredibly desperate this evening. Does Sterling know you are wearing a dress that looks like it belongs in a cheap nightclub?" Chloe gasped, her face flushing with immediate anger. She hated being reminded of her billionaire husband because it highlighted the fact that she owned absolutely nothing herself. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her heavy floral perfume was suffocating. A small crowd of wealthy socialites and campaign donors had naturally gathered nearby, pretending to chat, but secretly watching the drama unfold. You think you are so smart? Nia Chloe hissed, stepping right in front of me so the crowd could see her clearly. Keisha told me all about your little threats today. You think you can bully his family and control Darius with your boring corporate salary. You are pathetic. Look at you. You are wearing fake jewelry while your husband buys me the real thing. She reached up and touched the brilliant diamonds resting on her chest. He loves me, Nia. He is only staying with you because he feels sorry for you. I finally looked directly into her eyes. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I did not give her the emotional reaction she was desperately craving. And then she made her move. With a sudden theatrical gasp, Chloe stumbled forward, intentionally tilting her crystal glass toward me. A massive splash of dark red wine flew through the air and landed directly on the front of my emerald green gown. The dark liquid quickly soaked into the expensive silk, staining it ruined. Several people in the surrounding crowd gasped loudly. The music playing in the background seemed to fade away as everyone stopped to stare. "Oh my goodness, I am so incredibly sorry," Chloe loudly announced, projecting her voice so the entire room could hear. "It was a complete accident. My hand just slipped." She let out a high-pitched mocking laugh. "I guess corporate auditors cannot afford dry cleaning. If you are struggling financially, do you want my billionaire husband to buy you a brand new dress?" I slowly turned my head and looked across the room. Darius was standing less than 20 feet away. He saw the entire thing happen. He saw his mistress publicly assault and humiliate his wife. For a split second, his eyes met mine. I waited to see if he would finally step up and be a man. I waited to see if he would come defend me. But he just looked away, set his drink down, and quickly walked in the opposite direction like a complete coward. The crowd was waiting for a reaction. They expected me to scream. They expected me to cry or run out of the ballroom in shame. That is what normal women do when they are publicly humiliated. But I am not a normal woman. I calmly reached over to the buffet table and picked up a crisp white linen napkin. I dabbed gently at the wine stain on my dress, smoothing the fabric down. I did not show an ounce of anger. I actually smiled. It was a chilling, calculated smile that made the mocking laughter instantly die in Chloe's throat. I dropped the stained napkin onto the table and took one single step forward. I closed the distance between us until I was standing inches from her face. She tried to step back, but she bumped right into the cold ice sculpture behind her. She was completely trapped. I leaned in close so only she could hear my voice. "You are incredibly beautiful, Chloe," I whispered softly, keeping my tone completely flat and even. "But you are also incredibly stupid. You think Darius bought you those diamonds with his own money. Darius does not have $50,000. Darius is practically bankrupt." Her eyes widened in confusion. "What are you talking about?" she whispered back, her confidence suddenly shattering. I kept my eyes locked onto hers, entirely ignoring the crowd watching us. "That necklace around your neck was not bought with cash," I explained, my voice cold and surgical. "It was purchased using a specific black credit card, a card that belongs to an offshore shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, a shell company that is entirely owned and heavily monitored by your husband Sterling." Chloe's breath hitched. Her hand flew up to the diamonds, but she quickly pulled it away as if the stones were suddenly burning her skin. "Sterling tracks every single swipe, Chloe." I continued stepping even closer until she could feel the chill of the ice sculpture freezing her bare back. "He knows exactly where that necklace was purchased. He knows exactly who bought it. And most importantly, he knows exactly who is wearing it right now." She shook her head side to side in denial, but the sheer terror was already washing over her face. "You just paraded a stolen corporate asset in front of a room full of politicians and judges," I whispered, my voice dropping to a deadly calm frequency. "If you keep wearing it tonight, Sterling will not just divorce you. He will have his legal team have you arrested for grand larceny and corporate embezzlement by tomorrow morning. You will go from a Buckhead mansion to a federal prison cell because you wanted to play a petty game with a glass of wine." I pulled back slightly, allowing her to process the catastrophic reality of her situation. All the color had completely drained from her face. She looked like a ghost wrapped in a red dress. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could no longer hold her glass. The heavy crystal slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the marble floor. It shattered into a dozen jagged pieces, sending remaining drops of red wine splashing across her expensive designer shoes. She did not even look down at the broken glass. She stared at me with pure, unadulterated fear. Her chest heaved as she struggled to breathe. Without saying another word, she turned around and practically sprinted toward the exit, pushing past the wealthy donors and disappearing into the lobby. The surrounding crowd was stunned into absolute silence. They had no idea what I had just said to her, but they saw the immediate destructive result. I calmly smoothed the front of my ruined dress and picked up a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I looked across the massive ballroom, right past the shocked faces of the elite guests. Standing on the opposite side of the room near the grand balcony was Sterling. He was leaning casually against a marble pillar, watching the entire scene unfold. He did not smile. He did not wave. He simply raised his heavy glass of scotch, looked me directly in the eye, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The weekend carried on with a suffocating silence, filling every corner of our massive house. Darius did not ask what I had whispered to Chloe at the gala. He did not ask why his beautiful young mistress had sprinted out of the grand ballroom, looking like she had just seen a ghost. He was entirely too cowardly to confront the terrifying reality of his crumbling secret life. But by Sunday morning, his political desperation had fully returned to the surface. We had a mandatory public appearance scheduled at one of the largest megachurches in the entire state of Georgia. Securing the backing of this specific congregation was absolutely critical for his mayoral campaign. In local Atlanta politics, the church vote is the ultimate key to the entire city. If the senior pastor publicly endorses you, your poll numbers automatically skyrocket overnight. If he ignores you, your campaign quietly dies in the dark. We arrived at the massive sanctuary just as the choir finished their opening musical performance. The giant building held over 5,000 people packed tightly into curved wooden pews. High-definition television cameras were positioned on giant mechanical cranes, sweeping gracefully across the energetic crowd to broadcast the morning service live across the state. Darius wore a sharp, tailored navy blue suit, attempting to look incredibly humble and deeply spiritual for the voters. I walked closely beside him, wearing a modest but very expensive beige designer dress. As the polite ushers escorted us down the center aisle to the reserved front row, VIP seating, I immediately noticed two very familiar faces sitting just a few feet away, Keisha and Trey. They had miraculously recovered from the financial panic I caused them earlier in the week and were sitting there looking incredibly smug. Keisha wore a bright yellow dress and a massive extravagant church hat that partially blocked the view of the unfortunate people sitting behind her. She shot me a nasty, triumphant glare as we sat down, whispering something behind her hand to Trey, who snickered quietly. I quickly realized they were not just there to support their brother. They were there to watch a planned performance. The senior pastor was a highly charismatic man with a booming voice and a perfectly tailored, shiny silver suit. Darius had recently arranged a very generous campaign donation to the church building fund out of his political accounts to ensure this exact moment happened. After 45 minutes of intense sweating and passionate preaching, the pastor smoothly shifted his sermon toward the sacred topic of holy matrimony and righteous leadership. He wiped his sweating forehead with a crisp white handkerchief and looked directly down at our front row. "We are so incredibly blessed today," he bellowed into his golden microphone. "We have a powerful man in our presence who truly understands the biblical value of family. A man who wants to lead this great city with the exact same strong, steady hand he uses to lead his beautiful home. Councilman Darius, please come up here and join me on this stage." The massive crowd immediately erupted into thunderous applause. Darius stood up proudly, buttoned his suit jacket, and jogged up the carpeted stairs. He shook the pastor's hand vigorously and waved humbly to the cheering congregation. But the political stunt was not over yet. And you simply cannot have a great king without a devoted, submissive queen standing quietly in his shadow. The pastor continued, his voice echoing loudly through the massive speakers. "Sister Nia, come on up here right now. Come stand by your strong husband and show this city what a loyal, obedient wife looks like." Let us hear you testify about your absolute submission to his household leadership." The applause grew deafening in the enclosed room. The heavy camera cranes swung around instantly and pushed their giant glass lenses directly into my face. My stoic expression was suddenly projected onto the massive LED screens hanging high above the wooden stage. I looked up at Darius. He was smiling broadly, extending his hand generously toward me, but his eyes were completely dead and filled with malicious control. This was his pathetic attempt at revenge. He had paid the pastor to trap me in front of 5,000 registered voters and tens of thousands of live television viewers. He wanted to force me to publicly pledge my absolute devotion to him. He wanted to strip away my leverage and put me back in the tiny, silent box he thought I belonged in. If I refused to go up the stairs, I would look like a bitter, angry woman ruining a sacred church service. I did not hesitate for a single second. I stood up gracefully and walked up the carpeted steps with perfect, rigid posture. Keisha and Trey were practically bouncing in their seats, trying to hold back their malicious laughter. They thought I was finally defeated. They thought I had absolutely no choice but to bow my head and play the submissive little wife they desperately needed me to be. I reached the exact center of the stage. Darius proudly wrapped his heavy arm tightly around my waist, pulling me aggressively against his side. The smiling pastor handed me the golden microphone, fully expecting me to offer a meek, sweet prayer of absolute obedience to my husband. I gripped the cold metal microphone. I looked out over the massive sea of expectant faces stretching all the way to the back balcony. Then I looked down directly at Keisha and Trey sitting in the front row. Church is a place of absolute truth. I began, my voice ringing out clear and steady over the premium sound system. The congregation murmured in quiet agreement, waiting for my testimony. When you marry a man, you do not just marry his public successes and his smiling campaign posters. You marry his private ledgers. You marry his hidden accounts and the secret debts he accumulates when he thinks nobody is watching. As a corporate auditor, my entire life is dedicated to uncovering the truth hidden in the dark. I find the broken things people try desperately to bury. And let me tell you, there is absolutely nothing more important than balancing the books of morality. The crowd began to clap softly, completely missing the underlying threat in my words. They thought I was using a clever professional metaphor to praise my husband, but Darius suddenly went entirely rigid beside me. His thick fingers tightened painfully around my waist, digging into the fabric of my dress. A true leader cannot have hidden financial or moral deficits. I continued pacing slowly across the wide stage, forcing Darius to awkwardly drop his arm. A true leader cannot steal from his own house to feed his selfish desires outside of it. True submission is not about turning a blind eye to a man's secret sins. Real devotion is holding your partner strictly accountable for every single debt they accumulate in the dark. You cannot build a righteous political campaign on fraudulent spiritual tax returns. You cannot preach family values from a bright stage while secretly bankrupting the emotional trust of the people who actually feed you at home. A true partnership requires a full and transparent audit of the soul. The crowd started cheering louder, shouting their enthusiastic agreement. "Preach, sister," a woman in the second row yelled out, waving her paper fan frantically in the air. The people standing in the aisles were waving their hands, completely moved by the spirit of the moment. They loved the powerful message. They thought it was a fiery call for absolute integrity in politics. But the specific people my message was actually meant for were absolutely terrified. I looked down at the front row. Keisha had completely stopped smiling. Her mouth was slightly open in absolute horror. She knew I was openly referencing her fraudulent tax returns right in front of a live statewide television audience. Trey was staring down at his expensive shoes, visibly sweating through his dress shirt. I turned my head and looked right into the red light of the main camera lens, broadcasting my face across Atlanta. "I will stand by my husband exactly as long as his ledgers remain completely clean," I declared, my voice dropping to a serious, commanding tone. "And if I ever find that the books have been cooked well, the Lord says every hidden thing will eventually be brought into the light, and the penalties for those hidden debts will be incredibly severe." I lowered the golden microphone, The giant sanctuary absolutely exploded with noise. 5,000 people jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering wildly for my passionate speech. The pastor looked slightly confused by the intense corporate terminology, but he quickly grabbed the microphone back to ride the massive wave of intense energy. "God bless this powerful woman of truth," he shouted enthusiastically over the roaring noise. Darius kept his fake political smile plastered securely on his face, but his jaw was clenched so tightly I thought his back teeth might actually shatter. He grabbed my hand and aggressively led me off the side of the stage, waving to the cheering crowd one last time. As soon as we stepped out of the bright stage lights and passed through the heavy black curtains into the private backstage green room, the fake smile instantly vanished from his face. The green room was completely empty. The heavy wooden door swung shut behind us, blocking out the loud gospel music from the sanctuary. The thick concrete walls absorbed all the sound, leaving us in a suffocating quiet. Darius suddenly spun around and grabbed my upper arm. His fingers dug painfully into my skin, bruising the delicate tissue beneath the fabric of my dress. He pushed me back aggressively until my shoulders hit the cold concrete wall. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, his voice shaking with furious, uncontrolled anger. "Are you completely out of your mind? You just threatened me in front of 5,000 voters. You brought up taxes and hidden debts on a live statewide broadcast." "Let go of my arm, Darius," I said softly. My voice was dangerously calm. I did not try to pull away. I just stared directly into his sweating, desperate face. "You are supposed to play the perfect wife," he growled, refusing to loosen his painful grip. "You signed a legal contract. You are supposed to make me look good out there. You are not supposed to get up there and talk about holding me accountable. You are trying to ruin my entire life." I slowly tilted my head. "You set a pathetic trap for me," I replied coldly. "You paid that corrupt pastor to force me into a corner. You wanted to humiliate me in front of your greedy sister. But you seem to have forgotten the fundamental rules of our current arrangement. I am not your submissive wife anymore. I am your active auditor." He squeezed my arm even harder, trying to intimidate me with his physical size. "I am the man of this house, Nia. I am the one running for mayor. You will respect me when we are in public." I did not blink. "If you do not remove your hand from my arm in the next 3 seconds, I will walk out that back door, get in an Uber, and drive straight to Sterling's private residence." The billionaire's name hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. Sterling paid $10 million for my absolute silence. I continued keeping my eyes locked onto his terrified gaze. He bought exactly 90 days of my valuable time. Do you honestly think he will be happy to hear that his incredibly expensive investment is being physically assaulted in a dirty church green room by a desperate politician? If I call him right now, he will not just pull your campaign funding, Darius. He will actively destroy you. He will make sure you never work in this city again." Darius stared at me. The furious anger in his eyes was rapidly replaced by cold, paralyzing fear. He slowly realized the absolute truth of his pathetic situation. I was not trapped by the contract. He was. The $10 million was not just a legal retainer. It was a massive financial leash wrapped tightly around his neck, and I was the only one holding the end of it. His tight fingers slowly loosened. He pulled his hand away from my arm, taking a long, unsteady step back. He looked at his own shaking hands, then looked at me as if he was seeing a complete stranger. He finally understood that he had absolutely zero leverage. He was just a small pawn in a much larger game being played far above his intellectual pay grade. I calmly reached over and brushed the wrinkles out of my sleeve where he had just grabbed me. "Do not ever touch me in anger again," I warned him, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet concrete room. "Keep smiling for the television cameras. Keep raising your pathetic campaign funds. Keep playing your little political games. But remember exactly who owns you." Darius swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling heavily. He did not say a single word in response. He simply nodded, stepping aside to clear my path to the exit. He finally realized the brutal reality of his situation. He was a permanent hostage in his own marriage, and the walls of his carefully constructed prison were closing in faster than he could ever comprehend. By the time we reached day 60 of the 90-day agreement, the suffocating pressure had clearly started to break his mind. Darius was a man who thrived on public adoration and absolute control, but inside our home he had neither. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at the sound of my phone ringing, and carefully monitoring every single word he spoke in my presence. He needed an escape. He desperately needed to feel like he was still the powerful man he pretended to be on television. It was a Thursday evening when he finally made his move. He walked into the kitchen carrying a small leather duffel bag. He set it down gently on the floor and cleared his throat, trying to project a false sense of casual confidence. "Nia, I have to travel out of state for the weekend," he announced, avoiding direct eye contact. "My core campaign team is organizing a private strategy retreat down in Miami. We need to finalize the media rollout for the affordable housing project before the official launch next month. It is going to be a highly intense weekend, just me and the boys locked in a conference room crunching numbers and reviewing polling data." I stood at the kitchen island, slowly sipping a cup of hot green tea. I looked at the expensive leather duffel bag and then up at his nervous face. I knew exactly what this was. There was no campaign strategy retreat. There were no political advisors flying down to Florida to sit in a stuffy conference room. This was a romantic getaway. He had booked a luxury hotel room so he could spend the weekend drinking champagne and sleeping with Chloe, far away from my watchful eyes and Sterling's massive shadow. I set my teacup down and offered him a warm, incredibly supportive smile. "That sounds like a wonderful idea, Darius," I said smoothly. "You have been working under a tremendous amount of stress lately. A weekend away with your team is exactly what you need to clear your head and focus on the upcoming mayoral race." His shoulders visibly dropped in massive relief. He actually thought he had successfully manipulated me. He thought my strict corporate oversight had a blind spot. "Do you have everything you need?" I asked, walking over to him. I even reached out and gently straightened the collar of his shirt. "Did you pack your blue silk tie, the one that photographs so well against the ocean backdrop?" "Yes, I packed it," he replied quickly, his confidence surging back. "Thank you, Nia. I promise I will be back by Sunday night, ready to tackle the final stretch of the campaign." I watched him grab his duffel bag and practically sprint out the front door to his waiting car. He was so eager to escape his luxurious prison that he did not even realize he was walking directly into a trap. I walked over to the large living room window and watched his vehicle pull out of the driveway and disappear down the quiet street. Then I pulled out my cell phone and opened the flight tracking application. I waited exactly 2 hours. I watched the tiny digital airplane icon on my screen leave the Atlanta airport runway and ascend to 30,000 feet over the Florida coastline. The moment he lost all cellular signal and was completely isolated in the sky, my real work began. I walked straight down the hallway and pushed open the door to his private home office. Darius was incredibly arrogant, but he was not very bright when it came to digital security. He thought protecting a computer meant using a standard password and locking the physical door. He had absolutely no idea what a senior corporate auditor was actually capable of doing. I sat down in his heavy leather chair and booted up my own encrypted laptop, connecting it directly to his desktop server via a heavy data cable. I bypassed his simple network security protocols in less than 4 minutes. I was not looking for petty emails or deleted text messages. I already knew he was cheating. I was looking for the financial bloodline of his entire political career. I was looking for the upcoming initial public offering for his heavily publicized affordable housing project. Darius had been heavily promoting this specific real estate project to the Atlanta voters for the past year. He claimed it was a massive charitable initiative designed to build low-income housing across the city. The project was set to go public and receive tens of millions of dollars in private investments and city grants. But as I dug deeper into the hidden encrypted folders buried inside his server, the ugly truth began to violently unravel across my screen. The affordable housing project was a massive, intricately designed money laundering front. I pulled up the corporate registration documents and began tracing the digital paper trail. The primary construction company listed on the public brochures did not actually exist. It was a phantom corporation. The enormous sum of campaign donations he had been collecting was not going toward purchasing land or buying building materials. The funds were being systematically routed through a complex web of secondary accounts. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling banking records and cross-referencing routing numbers. The money was being funneled directly out of the country. I traced the outgoing wire transfers straight to a heavily protected offshore account located in the Cayman Islands. Darius was actively stealing campaign funds, hiding them offshore, and preparing to cash out massively the moment the project officially launched. But the most devastating discovery was buried in the final equity distribution contract. I opened a locked PDF document titled Shareholder Allocations. I scanned down the list of names and percentages. My eyes stopped cold on a specific proxy account holding 20% of the total project equity. The account was registered under a vague holding company, but I used my firm's database access to pull the corporate registration for that specific entity. The holding company was registered entirely under the name Chloe. Darius was not just buying her expensive fake diamond necklaces. He was secretly promising her millions of dollars in stolen public funds. He had legally tied her into his massive federal crime. He planned to use the illegal IPO money to secure a completely new life with his mistress, while leaving me legally tied to his sinking ship. When the authorities eventually caught on, I leaned back in his heavy leather chair, letting the cold glow of the computer monitor wash over my face. I felt a deep, thrilling surge of pure adrenaline. This was the ultimate checkmate. This was the exact financial leverage I needed for day 90. I carefully downloaded every single document, every wire transfer receipt, and every offshore routing number onto a secure encrypted flash drive. Just as I finished copying the final folder, my cell phone buzzed violently on the desk. It was a text message from Keisha. Despite being financially cut off and utterly humiliated in my office, she simply could not resist trying to hurt me. She was a bitter, venomous woman who derived twisted pleasure from other people's pain. I opened the message. There was no text, just a single screenshot attached. Keisha had taken a screenshot of Chloe's private Instagram story. Chloe had intentionally blocked me from viewing her social media accounts months ago, but Keisha was more than happy to play the role of the malicious messenger. I tapped the photo to enlarge it. It was a picture taken from the balcony of a high-rise luxury hotel. The bright blue Miami ocean stretched out in the background. In the foreground, resting on a small glass table, were two expensive crystal champagne glasses. Next to the glasses was the distinct blue silk tie I had just told Darius to pack. Chloe was arrogantly taunting me from Florida, believing her private account was entirely safe. She wanted me to know she had stolen my husband for the weekend. I stared at the photo. Most women would have cried. Most women would have thrown their phone across the room in a fit of jealous rage. I simply smiled. Chloe had just handed me the final piece of the puzzle on a silver platter. When you upload a photograph to a social media platform, it carries a hidden layer of invisible digital information called metadata. It contains the exact time the photo was taken, the type of camera used, and most importantly, the precise GPS coordinates of the device. I connected my phone to my laptop and pulled the image file directly into my digital extraction software. I stripped away the visual layers and exposed the raw data code underneath. The geographic coordinates populated instantly on my screen. I copied the numerical coordinates and dropped them into a global mapping program. The map rapidly zoomed in on the southern coast of Florida, pinpointing a highly exclusive 5-star luxury resort located directly on South Beach. But I did not stop there. Using the geographic data, I accessed the public registry for the hotel's wireless internet network. I pulled the specific IP address block associated with their VIP penthouse suites. I had their exact location down to the specific floor of the building. I opened a highly secure encrypted messaging application on my phone. I created a new digital packet containing the extracted GPS coordinates, the hotel name, the specific penthouse IP address, and the time-stamped screenshot of the champagne glasses. I did not include any emotional commentary. I did not ask any questions. I simply typed a single sentence. Your wife is currently enjoying the Florida sunshine. I hit send and routed the message directly to the private secure number Sterling had provided me on the day he walked into my kitchen. I sat quietly in the dark office, listening to the faint hum of the computer server. I imagined Sterling sitting in his massive glass office in Atlanta, receiving the ping on his phone. I imagined his cold, calculating eyes scanning the precise data I had just delivered. Darius and Chloe thought they had successfully escaped for a romantic weekend of freedom. They had absolutely no idea that invisible crosshairs were currently locking onto their exact location. Less than 60 seconds later, my phone vibrated on the desk. I picked it up and looked at the glowing screen. It was a direct response from Sterling. The message was incredibly brief, containing absolutely no punctuation, just raw, terrifying efficiency. Target acquired. The 90-day clock is ticking perfectly. I deleted the encrypted text message from Sterling and completely wiped the tracking software from my laptop. The trap in Miami had been sprung flawlessly. By the time Darius returned to Atlanta on Sunday night, he looked completely refreshed and incredibly arrogant. He kissed my cheek and told me the campaign retreat was a massive success. I smiled and told him I was so proud of his hard work. I let him live in his pathetic fantasy world for another week. Then came the summons. It was late Thursday evening when I received a secure digital calendar invite with a single set of geographic coordinates and a highly specific entry code. I dressed in a sharp black blazer and drove to an unassuming industrial district located on the edge of downtown Atlanta. There were no flashing neon signs or valet parking attendants, just an old brick building with a heavy iron door. I typed the entry code into the rusted keypad. The heavy door clicked open, revealing a dark, narrow hallway that led down into the basement. This was one of the most exclusive underground speakeasies in the city. It was a place where politicians, wealthy developers, and powerful brokers met to conduct off-the-record business far away from the prying eyes of the press. I walked past the main bar area and was immediately escorted by a massive security guard in a tailored suit down a dimly lit corridor to a private VIP room at the very back. The heavy mahogany door swung open. The room was thick with the rich scent of expensive imported cigars and aged bourbon. Sterling was sitting casually in a deep leather armchair. He looked completely relaxed, swirling a dark amber liquid in a heavy crystal glass. He nodded to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down, Nia," he said, his voice smooth and commanding. I took my seat and placed my leather briefcase on the dark wooden table between us. We were officially past the halfway point of our 90-day arrangement. It was time to finally lay all of our cards directly on the table. "You executed the Miami operation perfectly." Sterling began taking a slow sip of his bourbon. My private security team intercepted them at the hotel lobby. We have high-definition video footage of Chloe and Darius entering the penthouse suite together. We have time-stamped photographs of them on the balcony. We even pulled the room service receipts signed by your husband. The documentation is absolutely bulletproof. "I did my job," I replied, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "Now it is time for you to explain exactly why you are doing yours." "I am a corporate auditor, Sterling. I do not like working in the dark. I accepted your $10 million retainer because it gave me the strategic upper hand. But I need to know the exact mathematical equation you are solving. Why did you specifically ask for 90 days? Why not divorce her the moment you caught them together?" Sterling leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The faint orange glow of the single table lamp illuminated the cold, calculating intelligence in his eyes. "Because a sudden emotional divorce is incredibly expensive," he explained softly. "When I married Chloe 5 years ago, I knew exactly who she was. She was young, she was beautiful, and she was incredibly ambitious. She wanted the billionaire lifestyle, and I wanted a socially acceptable wife to host my corporate dinners. It was a simple business transaction. But I do not enter into any transaction without an ironclad exit strategy." He set his glass down on the table. "We signed a highly complex prenuptial agreement," he continued. "The standard terms dictate that in the event of a divorce, Chloe is legally entitled to a flat settlement of $50 million. If I had walked into your kitchen and filed for divorce on day one, I would have been legally obligated to write that check. I do not reward bad investments with $50 million. I nodded slowly, following his financial logic. "So you built a trapdoor into the contract." "Exactly." Sterling smiled a sharp, predatory smile. "I included a highly specific morality clause. It states that if I can legally prove Chloe engaged in a continuous, unbroken romantic affair for a minimum of 90 consecutive days, the entire financial structure of the prenuptial agreement instantly reverses." My eyes widened slightly as the sheer brilliance of his plan clicked into place. If she maintains the affair for 90 days, she forfeits the $50 million I stated. She forfeits every single penny, he confirmed. But it gets significantly better, Nia. The clause does not just strip her of the settlement, it legally reclassifies her status from a protected spouse to a liable corporate partner. For the past 2 years, I have been quietly moving several highly toxic, underperforming real estate debts into a specific corporate shell company. That shell company currently holds roughly $20 million in absolute deadweight liability. I felt a genuine thrill of professional admiration wash over me. You tied the toxic debt to the morality clause. Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms. On day 90, when I present the continuous evidence of her affair, she does not just walk away with $0. She is legally forced to absorb 50% of that toxic shell company. Chloe will instantly owe my firm $10 million in heavily penalized corporate debt. She will be completely bankrupt. Her credit will be permanently destroyed. She will spend the rest of her miserable life working a minimum wage job just to pay off the interest. The sheer ruthlessness of his strategy was genuinely beautiful. He was not just ending a marriage. He was orchestrating a complete financial annihilation. He had used my husband as the perfect distraction to keep Chloe occupied while the 90-day clock slowly ticked away. Now it is your turn, Sterling said, his eyes locking onto mine. I showed you my ledger. Show me yours. You are an incredibly intelligent woman, Nia. You could have walked away from Darius years ago. Why did you agree to stay and play the loving wife? What exactly happens on day 90 for you? I reached out and gently tapped the surface of my leather briefcase. My husband is a thief. I began, my voice matching his cold, steady tone. He thinks he is a brilliant political mastermind, but his accounting skills are absolutely pathetic. Darius has been heavily promoting a massive affordable housing project to the city of Atlanta. He claims it is a charitable initiative. But 2 weeks ago, while he was busy drinking champagne with your wife in Florida, I completely bypassed his home server network. I pulled the hidden banking records. Sterling raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. And what did you find? The entire housing project is a massive offshore money laundering front, I explained. He is actively funneling millions of dollars in political campaign donations into a phantom construction company. The money is being quietly routed to the Cayman Islands. But the most important detail is the timeline. The project is officially set to execute its initial public offering on the exact same week our 90-day contract expires. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the dark mahogany table. If I had handed him those divorce papers on day 1, I would have walked away with absolutely nothing. I continued. According to the state laws of Georgia, I would only be entitled to half of his legally declared public salary. Since he hides all of his real money in illegal offshore accounts, I would have been left fighting for a few $1,000s while he walked away clean. I needed the project to go public. I needed the stolen money to officially hit the mainstream banking system. Sterling nodded slowly, completely understanding my strategy. You need the assets to vest. Exactly, I said. On day 90, the initial public offering goes completely live. The offshore accounts will officially link to his domestic holding companies. The total valuation of the project will instantly hit approximately $30 million. And because we will still be legally married on that exact day, I have total spousal authorization to execute a massive financial freeze. I watched Sterling swirl the last drop of bourbon in his glass. As a senior corporate auditor, I am legally required to report severe financial fraud. I continued, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. On the morning of day 90, I will hand over the entire offshore routing packet to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But before the federal agents even have a chance to kick down his door, I will use my spousal rights and my professional auditing credentials to freeze all of his domestic accounts. I smiled, feeling the intense power of my own trap. I will legally seize my rightful 50% of his newly vested domestic portfolio before the government can confiscate it, I told him. $15 million, clean, legally obtained, and completely untouchable. Darius will be left with $0, a collapsed political campaign, and a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and political corruption. And he promised 20% of his illegal equity to Chloe. which means when the federal authorities raid his offices, they will drag your wife into the criminal conspiracy as a willing accomplice. The private VIP room fell incredibly silent. The heavy air conditioning hummed softly in the background. We sat there, two apex predators, sitting in the dark, methodically discussing the absolute destruction of the people who thought they were smart enough to betray us. We did not yell. We did not cry over broken vows. We simply balanced the books. Sterling looked at me with a level of deep, genuine respect that he reserved strictly for his most ruthless corporate board members. He reached over to the heavy crystal decanter resting on the side table and poured a second glass of expensive aged bourbon. He slid the heavy glass across the mahogany table toward me. He picked up his own glass and held it up in the dimly lit room. "Your husband is an absolute fool, Nia," he said, his voice echoing slightly against the brick walls. He had a brilliant, lethal weapon sleeping right next to him every single night, and he traded it for a cheap, shiny toy. He is going to lose everything, and he deserves every single second of it. I picked up my heavy crystal glass, feeling the cool condensation against my fingers. I looked at the billionaire sitting across from me. We had formed the most dangerous alliance in the entire city of Atlanta. "To the 90-day deadline," I said softly. Sterling tapped his glass gently against mine, making a sharp ringing sound that pierced the quiet room. "To the greatest audit in Atlanta history," he replied. The final weeks of the 90-day agreement moved with a suffocating slowness, but I navigated every single day with the cold precision of a surgeon. I attended the campaign rallies. I smiled for the local news cameras. I stood faithfully beside Darius while he lied to the citizens of Atlanta about his incredible family values and his grand vision for the city. I was playing my part flawlessly. But as the clock rapidly approached the deadline, the atmosphere inside our house grew incredibly volatile. Darius was getting sloppy. The pressure of the upcoming initial public offering and his secret life with Chloe was pushing him into a state of sheer panic. He knew the massive influx of offshore money was about to hit his domestic accounts, and he needed to make sure I was completely cut off from the blast radius. Day 85 arrived on a quiet Tuesday evening. I was sitting comfortably on the white leather sofa in the living room, reviewing a legitimate financial audit for one of my corporate clients. The house was entirely silent until the heavy oak front door suddenly swung open. Darius did not walk in alone. He marched into the foyer with an aggressive, confident stride, completely unlike the terrified man he had been acting like for the past 2 months. Trailing closely behind him was a short, nervous-looking man holding a battered leather briefcase. And right behind the nervous man were Keisha and Trey. Despite my strict orders banishing them from my property, Darius had brought his parasitic siblings right back into my home to act as his personal cheering section. Darius walked straight into the living room and pointed to the glass coffee table. The nervous man, who I immediately recognized as a cheap strip mall attorney Darius occasionally used for minor legal issues, scrambled forward. He popped open his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of freshly printed legal documents bound heavily by a thick black clip. The attorney practically threw the heavy stack onto the glass table directly in front of me. "What exactly is this, Darius?" I asked calmly, not even bothering to close my laptop. Darius puffed out his chest, looking down at me with an incredibly smug expression. "It is just some routine tax restructuring paperwork, Nia," he lied smoothly. "My campaign manager and my legal team have been reviewing the upcoming launch for the affordable housing project. Because of my transition into a major public office, we need to legally separate my new business assets from our joint marital accounts. It protects you from any future campaign liabilities, and it keeps my political donors completely happy." I looked at the thick stack of papers and then looked up at his face. He was an incredibly terrible liar. The attorney shifted nervously from foot to foot, avoiding my direct gaze. "Councilman Darius is simply trying to streamline his tax burden before the mayoral election," he mumbled quickly. "We just need your signature on the last page and your initials on all the marked margins. It will only take a minute of your time." I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy document. I did not flip to the signature page. I flipped straight to the middle section where the actual binding clauses are always buried. It took my highly trained eyes exactly 4 seconds to scan the legal jargon and realize exactly what this was. This was not a tax restructuring document. It was a highly aggressive, entirely one-sided post-nuptial agreement. Darius was trying to pull the ultimate blindside. The legal clauses buried in the dense text explicitly stated that I was permanently waiving my spousal rights to any and all equity associated with his holding companies, his real estate ventures, and his upcoming initial public offering. If I signed this document, I would legally sever myself from the $30 million that was about to vest in exactly 5 days. I would be locked out of the financial freeze I had carefully planned with Sterling. I would be left with absolutely nothing while Darius and Chloe walked away with a massive fortune built entirely on my stolen credit and my hard work. I did not say a word. I just continued reading the document, keeping my face completely blank. My silence was making them incredibly anxious. Keisha, who had been standing quietly by the doorway, finally lost her patience and stepped aggressively into the room. She was practically vibrating with malicious excitement. "Just sign the damn papers," Keisha snapped, crossing her arms over her chest. "You have been holding my brother back for years with your controlling behavior. He is about to be the mayor of Atlanta. He is doing big things for this city, and he does not have the time to explain every single little financial detail to a glorified accountant. Be a good, supportive wife for once in your miserable life, and do what your husband tells you to do." Trey nodded eagerly, standing right beside her. "Yeah, Nia, just sign it." Darius said, "You have to sign it tonight or it messes up the whole campaign schedule. Do not be difficult." I ignored the two parasites and looked directly at Darius. "You are asking me to waive my legal rights to our shared assets," I stated flatly, translating the dense legal jargon into plain English. "You are asking me to sign away my protection." Darius narrowed his eyes, stepping closer to the glass table. His false confidence hardened into a genuine aggressive threat. "I am not asking you, Naya. I am telling you. You signed a legally binding contract with Sterling to play the perfect supportive wife for 90 days. If you refuse to sign these tax papers right now, you are actively sabotaging my political campaign. You are intentionally hurting my financial standing. If you do not pick up a pen right now, I will call Sterling myself and tell him you are violating the terms of the agreement. You will lose your precious $10 million retainer, and I will personally drag you through the mud in the local press." He was actually trying to use my own trap against me. He thought the threat of Sterling pulling the massive retainer would force me to surrender my marital rights. He truly believed he had me completely cornered. I looked at the attorney sweating in his cheap suit. I looked at Keisha and Trey, practically salivating at the thought of me finally losing my power over their family. And I looked at Darius, the arrogant, cheating thief who thought he could outsmart a senior corporate auditor. I needed them to leave this house believing they had won. I needed Darius to proceed confidently with his fraudulent initial public offering on day 90. If I fought him right now, if I tore up the papers and threw them in his face, he would panic. He would delay the IPO, he would move the money deeper underground, and I would lose my perfect opportunity to freeze the assets. It was time to give them the exact performance they were desperately waiting for. I slowly lowered the thick legal document back onto the glass coffee table. I let my shoulders slump forward intentionally, breaking my rigid, perfect posture. I looked down at my hands and took a long, shaky breath, making sure it was loud enough for all of them to hear. I blinked rapidly, forcing the moisture in my eyes to pool together. A single solitary tear escaped and rolled slowly down my cheek. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. I looked absolutely defeated. I looked like a broken, exhausted woman who had finally been crushed by the overwhelming weight of her husband's power. Darius let out a loud, triumphant laugh. He looked at Keisha and smirked broadly. The tension in the room instantly evaporated, completely replaced by their disgusting, arrogant victory. "That is what I thought," Darius sneered, looking down at me, as if I were a piece of dirt on his shoe. "You always think you are the smartest person in the room, Nia, but you are just an auditor. I am the one building an empire. Now stop crying and sign the papers so we can all move on with our lives." I reached a trembling hand into my designer leather purse, resting on the sofa beside me. I bypassed the standard blue and black ballpoint pens I kept in the front pocket. Instead, I reached into the hidden zippered compartment lining the bottom of the bag. My fingers wrapped around the smooth, cool metal of my absolute favorite writing instrument. It was a heavy silver fountain pen, a very specific, highly expensive tool I purchased years ago when I started conducting extreme high-stakes corporate espionage investigations. I pulled the silver pen out of my purse and clicked the cap off with a sharp snap. I leaned forward over the glass table. My hand was shaking slightly, an intentional physical detail to sell my complete surrender. I flipped to the very first page and pressed the metal tip of the pen against the paper. The dark blue ink flowed beautifully across the crisp white page. I signed my full legal name with perfect flowing cursive. I flipped to the next page and initialed the margin. I flipped again and signed the witness line. Page after page, I methodically signed away my rights, my equity, and my financial future. The cheap attorney practically drooled as he watched me legally sever myself from a $30 million fortune. Keisha was whispering excitedly to Trey, already planning how she was going to spend her brother's upcoming wealth. I reached the final page, signed my name one last time, and pushed the heavy stack of documents across the glass table toward the attorney. "Are you happy now, Darius?" I asked, my voice barely above a broken whisper. Darius snatched the papers right out of the attorney's hands, flipping quickly to the back page to verify my signature was actually there. He saw the dark blue ink and a massive, greedy smile stretched across his face. "I am incredibly happy, Nia," he replied, stuffing the documents forcefully into the attorney's briefcase. "In fact, I am feeling so great about the future that I think you should start packing your bags this weekend. The campaign is moving in a completely new direction, and I will be making some major personnel changes in my personal life very soon." He was already planning to move Chloe into my house the second the 90-day contract expired. "Let's go," Keisha Darius commanded, turning his back on me completely. "We have a lot of celebrating to do tonight." The parasites did not even bother to say goodbye. Keisha shot me one final look of absolute disgust and triumph before following her brother out the door. The cheap attorney scurried out right behind them, pulling the heavy front door shut. The loud click of the lock echoed in the silent living room. I sat alone on the white leather sofa. I reached up and casually wiped the fake tear off my cheek, entirely erasing the broken woman they thought they had just defeated. I stood up and walked slowly over to the large bay window at the front of the house. I pulled back the sheer curtain and watched Darius excitedly high-five Trey in the driveway before climbing into his luxury car. They drove away completely convinced they had just executed the greatest legal heist in Atlanta history. I looked down at the heavy silver fountain pen, resting quietly in my hand. When you conduct corporate risk assessments for multi-billion-dollar tech companies, you learn about highly specialized tools. The dark blue ink currently drying on those critical legal documents was not standard commercial ink. It was a highly advanced chemical compound engineered specifically for industrial espionage and secure document transportation. The ink reacts aggressively with the natural oxygen in the ambient air. Darius was going to take those signed documents and lock them safely inside a dark filing cabinet in his campaign headquarters. He was going to sleep incredibly well tonight, dreaming of his new life with Chloe and his massive offshore fortune. But by the time the sun came up tomorrow morning, the chemical reaction would be completely finished. The dark blue cursive would slowly fade away, turning entirely transparent, leaving absolutely no trace behind. By tomorrow morning, every single signature I just provided would vanish into thin air. The post-nuptial agreement would be entirely blank, making it legally void and utterly worthless. I smiled, letting the sheer curtain fall back into place. I was still fully entitled to my 50%, and day 90 was coming. The secret mistress. Now she believed she was finally stepping into the bright spotlight. Chloe wanted me to feel the devastating sting of being replaced. She wanted me to imagine her standing on that grand stage tomorrow night, wearing a custom designer gown, holding the arm of the next mayor of Atlanta. She thought her message would completely crush my spirit and send me spiraling into a desperate, jealous rage. I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment. I did not type a furious reply. I did not call the unknown number to scream at her. Responding to a petty taunt is a massive sign of emotional weakness. It shows the enemy that their words have successfully pierced your armor. Instead, I pressed a single button and permanently deleted the message. I did not block the number. I simply erased her existence from my screen. Let her enjoy her pathetic fantasy for 24 more hours. Let her buy the expensive dresses and practice her wealthy socialite wave. The higher she climbed onto that imaginary pedestal, the harder she was going to shatter when I kicked the entire foundation out from under her. I walked back into the living room just as Darius came marching down the grand staircase. He was wearing a brand new custom-tailored charcoal suit, holding an expensive leather garment bag over his shoulder. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked around at the towering stacks of cardboard boxes his siblings had haphazardly taped together. He looked incredibly proud of himself. He looked like a man who had successfully conquered his entire world. "I am heading to the new penthouse, Nia," he announced, his voice practically echoing with false authority. "My campaign team needs me on site to coordinate the final media strategy for the launch tomorrow. I will probably not be coming back here tonight. In fact, I will be incredibly busy for the foreseeable future." He was intentionally leaving the door open for his permanent departure. He wanted me to beg him to stay. He wanted me to cry and cling to his expensive suit, begging him not to abandon our marriage. I offered him a tight, perfectly constructed smile of pure resignation. "I understand, Darius," I replied softly, playing the exact role he expected. "You have incredibly important things to take care of for the city. Please do not worry about me. I will manage everything here at the house." He smirked, completely satisfied with my apparent submission. He adjusted his silk tie and walked out the front door without looking back a single time. Keisha and Trey followed closely behind him, dragging the last of their heavy boxes aggressively across the threshold. When the heavy oak door finally clicked shut, the absolute silence that fell over the large house was genuinely beautiful. The parasites were entirely gone. The lying husband was out of the building. The stage was completely clear. I turned around and walked directly up the stairs to my private home office. I unlocked the heavy reinforced steel filing cabinet and carefully pulled out the massive stack of documents I had been secretly compiling over the past month. It was a 400-page masterclass in financial forensics. I had printed every single wire transfer, every encrypted email, every fake construction invoice, and every offshore routing number associated with the Cayman Islands accounts. I painstakingly organized the massive file into 4 thick, leather-bound binders. I used precise color-coded tabs to highlight the specific illegal transactions. I cross-referenced the stolen campaign funds directly to the phantom corporate entities, and I dedicated an entire section exclusively to the holding company legally registered under Chloe's name, proving her undeniable complicity in the federal crime. I carefully packed the 4 heavy binders into a large black reinforced leather briefcase. I walked into my master bedroom and changed out of my casual morning clothes. I put on my sharpest dark navy business suit. I tied my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I applied a minimal amount of makeup. I was not dressing to impress anyone. I was dressing for a financial execution. I drove my black Range Rover out of the quiet, wealthy suburbs and headed straight into the heart of downtown Atlanta. I did not drive to my corporate auditing firm. I drove directly to the heavily fortified federal building that housed the regional headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The security at the federal building was incredibly intense. I passed through 2 separate metal detectors and surrendered my cellular phone to the armed guards at the front desk. But I was not just a random, angry wife walking in off the street to file a petty domestic complaint. I was a senior corporate auditor who frequently worked alongside federal agencies on massive corporate fraud cases. I knew exactly who to call. I had scheduled a highly confidential emergency meeting with Special Agent Thomas, a senior investigator in the Elite Financial Crimes Division. An armed escort led me down a long, sterile hallway with harsh fluorescent lighting. We stopped at a heavy, unmarked door. The guard opened it, and I stepped into a cold, windowless conference room. Special Agent Thomas was already sitting at the long metal table. He was a stern, older man with sharp gray eyes and absolutely zero patience for wasted time. He looked up as I set my heavy black briefcase on the table. "You said this was an absolute emergency, Nia," he stated, his voice gruff and commanding. You better not be bringing me a minor tax discrepancy. My division is currently buried in international cartel cases. I do not have the manpower to chase small corporate accounting errors for local politicians. I did not say a word. I simply unlocked the heavy brass latches on my briefcase. The sharp clicks echoed loudly in the quiet room. I pulled out the first thick leather-bound binder and slid it across the cold metal table, directly into his hands. "I am bringing you the mayor of Atlanta, Agent Thomas," I replied, keeping my voice completely flat and professional. "Or at least the man who thinks he is going to be the mayor tomorrow night." He opened the heavy cover and stared at the first page. I did not wait for him to ask questions. I immediately launched into my presentation. Councilman Darius is currently running a massive money laundering syndicate disguised as a public affordable housing initiative, I explained, pointing to the highlighted offshore routing numbers on the first page. He is actively funneling millions of dollars in political campaign donations through phantom construction companies. The money is leaving the United States entirely and sitting in heavily protected accounts in the Cayman Islands. Special Agent Thomas stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. His sharp gray eyes rapidly scanned the complex spreadsheets and the undeniable paper trail I had meticulously constructed. He flipped to the next page and then the next. The initial annoyance on his face completely vanished instantly, replaced by the intense predatory focus of a federal investigator looking at a massive career-defining case. I slid the second binder across the table. "I have also identified his primary co-conspirator." I continued tapping the dark leather cover. "She is the wife of a highly prominent billionaire in this city. Darius has legally promised her 20% of the stolen equity through a hidden proxy corporation. She is fully legally liable for the international wire fraud." Agent Thomas looked up from the documents. His mind was racing, processing the sheer magnitude of the criminal conspiracy sitting right in front of him. "This is an absolutely airtight audit," he whispered almost to himself. "But offshore accounts are notoriously difficult to seize. If we alert him now, he can permanently burn the digital trail and trap the money in the Caribbean forever." "That is exactly why you are not going to alert him today," I stated, leaning forward over the metal table. "Tomorrow evening, Darius is officially launching an initial public offering for the fake housing project. The exact moment he steps on stage to announce the launch, the offshore money will automatically route back into his domestic holding companies to falsely inflate the project's public valuation. The stolen millions will hit the mainstream banking system on American soil." I looked directly into the federal agent's eyes. "I want to make a highly specific arrangement. I am legally entitled to 50% of his legitimate domestic assets. Before he steps on that stage tomorrow, I will use my spousal rights and my auditing credentials to execute a massive financial freeze on the accounts holding my legal share. I will completely isolate my clean money. The second my freeze is confirmed, you will execute your federal raid. You will confiscate the $30 million in stolen campaign funds, you will seize the phantom companies, and you will arrest him on live television. You get the biggest political corruption bust in the history of Georgia, and I get my rightful money completely untouched by your federal forfeiture." Special Agent Thomas stared at me in absolute silence. He looked at the 400 pages of devastating, undeniable evidence. He knew I had just handed him a massive promotion wrapped in a neat little bow. He did not need to spend months conducting dangerous surveillance or requesting complex subpoenas. The entire case was already solved. He simply had to show up and collect the criminals. He reached over to his desk, grabbed a heavy red rubber stamp, and pressed it down hard onto the front cover of my primary audit file. He pulled the stamp away, revealing 3 bold red words. "Approved for raid." "We have a deal," Nia, the agent said, extending his hand. "My tactical teams will be fully positioned at the launch venue by 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. Do not let him suspect a single thing." I shook his hand firmly, packed my empty briefcase, and walked out of the federal building. I drove back to my massive silent house. The sun was slowly setting over the Atlanta skyline, casting long dark shadows across the empty living room. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom, changed into comfortable clothes, and lay down on the large bed. I reached over to the nightstand and picked up my cell phone. I opened the clock application. I set my alarm for 6 o'clock in the morning. Day 90 had finally arrived. The alarm went off at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. I did not hit the snooze button. I sat up in the empty bed, completely awake and entirely focused. Today was the day the books would finally be balanced. I walked into my home office, booted up my encrypted laptop, and logged directly into the joint domestic banking portals. The initial public offering for the affordable housing project had officially gone live at the opening bell of the global markets. I watched the numbers rapidly inflate on my screen as the offshore Cayman Island funds began aggressively flooding back into the domestic holding accounts. The valuation spiked exactly as Darius had planned. It hit $30 million. Using my absolute legal authority as his wife and my high-level auditing credentials, I initiated the emergency financial freeze. I isolated exactly $15 million, representing my lawful 50% of the marital assets, and transferred it directly into an untouchable blind trust registered solely in my name. The transfer cleared immediately. My money was safe. By the time Darius woke up in his downtown penthouse, he was completely locked out of the remaining domestic funds. But he would not notice until it was far too late, because he was far too busy preparing for his grand coronation. The mayoral announcement and initial public offering launch party was held at the magnificent Georgia Aquarium. The venue was breathtaking. The massive ballroom featured enormous floor-to-ceiling glass walls revealing the dark blue water of the main tank. Giant whale sharks and manta rays glided silently behind the glass, providing a stunning dramatic backdrop for the political elite of Atlanta. The room was absolutely packed. Hundreds of wealthy campaign donors, local celebrities, and powerful real estate developers mingled under the ambient blue lighting. A massive section at the back of the room was entirely cordoned off for the press. Dozens of television cameras were set up on tall metal tripods, capturing every single angle of the highly anticipated event. I arrived quietly and stood near the back of the room near the heavy velvet curtains. I wore a sleek, tailored black dress blending perfectly into the shadows. I watched the absolute circus unfold in front of me. Darius was standing near the front of the stage, visibly sweating with pure, greedy excitement. He wore a sharp black tuxedo. He was shaking hands aggressively, slapping wealthy men on the back and laughing loudly. He honestly believed he had just become one of the most powerful and wealthy men in the state of Georgia. He thought his offshore money was completely secure, and his political future was absolutely guaranteed. Sitting dead center in the front row, VIP section, was Chloe. She was practically vibrating with desperate anticipation. She had chosen to wear a stark white custom designer dress. It was an incredibly deliberate choice, making her look almost like a modern bride preparing to step into her brand new life. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she wore the real diamond necklace Darius had bought with Sterling's corporate credit card. She kept looking up at the empty stage, then looking back at the press cameras, making sure they were capturing her perfect profile. Sitting at a lavish table right next to her were Keisha and Trey. They were aggressively drinking premium champagne straight from the expensive crystal bottles. Keisha was wearing a loud, heavily sequined dress, acting like she owned the entire aquarium. She was loudly boasting to the surrounding donors about her brother's incredible success, completely unaware that her personal bank accounts were currently sitting at zero. They were all completely intoxicated by their fake victory. At exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy ballroom lights dimmed. The crowd immediately fell silent. A massive high-definition LED screen positioned directly behind the podium illuminated, casting a bright white glow across the room. The screen displayed Darius's bold political campaign logo alongside the corporate branding for the newly launched affordable housing project. The announcer called his name, and Darius practically ran up the stairs to the stage. The room erupted into massive applause. The press cameras flashed rapidly, lighting up the dark room like a violent thunderstorm. Darius stepped up to the acrylic podium and gripped the edges firmly. He looked out over the massive crowd, his chest heaving with extreme pride. He waited for the applause to die down before leaning into the microphone. "Thank you, Atlanta," he began, his deep voice echoing beautifully through the massive ballroom. "Tonight is not just about launching a real estate project. Tonight is about building a completely new future for this great city. We are standing at the absolute precipice of monumental change." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the crowd hang on his every word. He looked directly down at Chloe sitting in the front row. She offered him a bright, encouraging smile, her eyes shining with absolute greed. When you talk about building a new future, you have to talk about the concept of absolute loyalty. Darius continued smoothly transitioning into his prepared speech. You have to surround yourself with people who truly understand your vision. People who are willing to sacrifice everything to build a better community. For the past year, this affordable housing initiative has been my sole focus. And thanks to your generous contributions, we have officially launched the initial public offering tonight, bringing tens of millions of dollars directly back into our local neighborhoods. The crowd cheered again, completely unaware that the money he was talking about was currently frozen in a federal trap. Darius raised his hand to quiet the room. He took a deep breath and prepared to execute his final arrogant move. He was going entirely off script. He had not cleared this next part with his campaign managers or his public relations team. He wanted to make a massive dramatic splash on live television. But true leadership requires absolute honesty, Darius said, his tone suddenly shifting to sound incredibly somber and deeply personal. It requires making incredibly difficult decisions. Sometimes to truly step into a new future, you have to have the courage to leave your broken past behind. You have to walk away from the things that are holding you back. A quiet murmur rippled through the ballroom. The wealthy donors exchanged confused glances. The press reporters instantly leaned forward, sensing a massive breaking scandal. For many years, I have tried to be the perfect family man, Darius continued, his voice dripping with fake emotion. But the truth is, my marriage has been over for a very long time. I have been carrying the heavy burden of a toxic, unsupported relationship while trying to serve this great city. But tonight I am choosing honesty. Tonight I am announcing my official legal separation from my wife, Nia. The room gasped. Keisha and Trey cheered loudly from their VIP table, clapping their hands in aggressive support. Chloe sat up perfectly straight in her stark white dress, practically glowing with victory. This was her exact moment. This was the exact second she had been waiting for her entire adult life. Darius smiled down at her, completely drunk on his own perceived power. I am closing that dark chapter of my life, he announced loudly into the microphone. Because I have finally found someone who truly understands my vision, someone who has stood by me in secret, supporting my dreams and pushing me to become the greatest leader this city has ever seen. Atlanta. I want to introduce you to my true partner. I want to introduce you to the future First Lady of this city. Please put your hands together for the beautiful and incredible. He opened his mouth to say her name, but the name never left his lips. A sharp, piercing sound of electronic static violently erupted from the massive speakers positioned around the ballroom. The agonizing noise forced several people in the front row to cover their ears. The bright campaign logo glowing on the massive LED screen directly behind Darius abruptly glitched. The screen flashed bright green, then completely cut to a pitch-black screen. Darius spun around, clearly annoyed, tapping the acrylic podium. Hey, can we get the audio-visual team to fix the screen? He demanded into the microphone. We are on live television here. But the audio-visual team was not the problem. I had personally handed the master control codes for the ballroom media system directly to Sterling's elite corporate security team earlier that afternoon. They had completely hijacked the central feed. The massive LED screen suddenly flared back to life. But it was no longer displaying a political logo. It was playing crystal clear, ultra-high-definition 4K security footage. The video was massive, dominating the entire wall of the ballroom. The bright white timestamp was permanently burned into the bottom right corner of the video, explicitly proving the exact date and time. It was day 60 of the 90-day agreement. The video showed the brightly lit hallway of the luxury 5-star hotel in Miami, Florida. The heavy wooden door of the VIP penthouse suite was clearly visible. Suddenly, Darius walked right into the center of the frame. He was wearing his casual vacation clothes. He was laughing, pulling a heavy leather duffel bag. And walking right behind him, holding his hand and pressing her body tightly against his, was Chloe. The massive ballroom fell into an absolutely terrifying dead silence. The only sound in the entire room was the soft hum of the massive aquarium filtration system. The video cut to a second security angle. This one was taken directly from a camera positioned near the penthouse balcony. The footage showed Darius and Chloe standing alone on the private terrace looking out over the blue Miami Ocean. They were holding expensive crystal champagne glasses. Darius leaned in and kissed her passionately. Chloe wrapped her arms around his neck, her hands tangling in his hair, exactly like the photographs I had thrown at his chest 3 months ago. The video looped seamlessly, playing the undeniable evidence of their secret affair over and over again on a massive 50-foot screen directly behind the man who had just preached about absolute honesty and loyalty. The entire room gasped collectively. The sound was like all the oxygen being violently sucked out of the enormous ballroom at the exact same time. The press section exploded into absolute chaos. Dozens of camera shutters began clicking, frantically capturing the catastrophic moment. Reporters were shouting urgently into their cellular phones, realizing they were broadcasting the total destruction of the front-running mayoral candidate on live statewide television. Sitting in the front row, Chloe completely froze. Her perfectly styled posture shattered instantly. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. She stared up at the massive screen, watching herself kiss the politician in extreme high definition. The stark white designer dress she was wearing suddenly looked like a pathetic joke. She realized in a fraction of a second that her entire secret life had just been exposed to the absolute wealthiest and most powerful people in the entire state, including her billionaire husband. At the VIP table, Keisha dropped her premium crystal champagne glass. It shattered violently against the marble floor, but nobody even looked in her direction. Trey sat with his mouth hanging wide open, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the public disaster. On the stage, Darius looked absolutely terrified. He slowly turned his head back to look at the massive screen behind him. He saw his own face blown up to 50 feet tall, exposing his darkest secret to his wealthiest donors and the entire voting public. All the arrogant color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. He realized he was completely trapped. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. His fingers went completely numb. The heavy metal microphone slipped directly through his fingers and plummeted downward. It hit the hard wooden stage with a deafening, echoing thud that resonated through the completely silent ballroom. The initial trap had successfully closed, but the real show was just beginning. White paper. There were no signatures on the designated lines. There were no initials in the margins. The heavy legal document was completely and entirely blank, fading ink. Darius the First announced, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom without the need for a microphone. You thought you could outsmart a senior corporate auditor with a cheap strip mall attorney. The pen I used last night contained an industrial espionage-grade fading chemical compound. The signatures you locked inside your safe vanished into thin air before the sun even came up this morning. You own absolutely nothing. Darius stared at the blank pages in my hand. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. No, he stammered, taking a shaky step back. No, I saw you sign it. I saw the dark blue ink. You signed away your equity. The initial public offering money is mine. I slowly lowered the blank document and smiled. It was the coldest, most unforgiving smile of my entire life. The initial public offering launched at exactly 6 o'clock this morning, I explained, watching the absolute terror completely wash over his face. The offshore money flooded directly back into your domestic holding accounts exactly as you planned. It hit a total valuation of $30 million. But because those papers are completely blank, we are still legally married. And because we are legally married, I used my spousal authority to execute an emergency financial freeze on my lawful 50% of the marital assets before you even woke up today. I took one step closer to the stage, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. $15 million, Darius, I said softly but loud enough for the press cameras to record every single syllable. $15 million was legally isolated and transferred directly into an untouchable blind trust registered solely in my name. The transfer cleared hours ago. That money is safe, clean, and completely out of your reach. The remaining $15 million is still sitting in your accounts. But unfortunately for you, That money is tied directly to an international money laundering scheme that I have already meticulously documented and handed over to the federal authorities. Darius physically stumbled backward. His knees buckled slightly and he had to grab the heavy acrylic podium just to keep himself from collapsing onto the wooden stage. He looked completely destroyed. The massive offshore fortune he had illegally built over the past year had been entirely ripped away from him in a matter of seconds. His political campaign was dead. His reputation was permanently shattered. Down on the marble floor, Chloe stopped crying. She looked up at Darius, her face smeared with thick black mascara. Her ears rang with the devastating words I had just spoken. "You have no money," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and sudden violent rage. "You promised me millions of dollars, Darius. You told me we were going to be rich. You told me I was going to be a billionaire." Darius glared down at her, the last remaining shred of his false charming personality completely evaporating. He was a cornered, desperate animal, and he immediately turned on the person closest to him. "Shut up," he screamed violently, kicking his polished dress shoe toward her. "This is all your fault. If you had not been so incredibly sloppy in Miami, none of this would be happening. You ruined my life. You ruined my campaign." Chloe scrambled to her feet, her bare feet slipping slightly on the spilled champagne. "You used me!" she shrieked, lunging forward and slamming her fists against the edge of the tall wooden stage. "You are a pathetic, broke liar. I gave up my entire life with Sterling for you, and now I have a $20 million debt. You have to fix this. You have to pay him." "I am going to federal prison, you stupid woman," Darius roared back at her, completely losing his mind in front of the entire Atlanta press corps. The cameras flashed aggressively, capturing the beautiful, glamorous couple tearing each other apart like wild dogs. The wealthy campaign donors were actively backing away toward the heavy double doors, completely horrified by the chaotic scene. Nobody wanted to be caught in the blast radius of a massive federal corruption scandal. Up on the shadowed VIP balcony, Sterling watched the destruction with cold, silent approval. He had executed his exact vengeance. He had protected his massive fortune and permanently ruined the woman who had dared to humiliate him. He raised his heavy crystal glass of scotch, taking one final sip before turning around and disappearing quietly back into the dark corridor, leaving Chloe completely alone to face her terrifying new reality. Over at the VIP tables, Keisha and Trey were frozen in absolute panic. Keisha clutched her head, pulling at her expensive wig. The smug, arrogant expression she had worn all morning when she told me to start looking for a studio apartment was entirely gone. She realized with horrifying clarity that Darius was not moving into a luxury downtown penthouse. He was going to a federal penitentiary, and she was going to be living on the streets with absolutely no financial support. Trey stood up, knocking his chair over backward. "We have to leave Keisha," he panicked, grabbing her arm aggressively. "We have to get out of here right now before the police show up and start asking questions." But it was already far too late. I turned my back on Darius and walked slowly away from the stage. I looked toward the massive floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the main aquarium tank. Beyond the dark blue water, beyond the thick glass, the grand lobby of the building was supposed to be completely dark. But suddenly bright flashing lights illuminated the water. Fierce strobes of sharp red and piercing blue violently reflected against the massive acrylic glass. The bright emergency lights cut through the darkness of the ballroom, painting the terrified faces of the crowd in alternating flashes of crimson and sapphire. The heavy wail of approaching sirens grew rapidly louder, cutting through the chaotic shouting of the press reporters. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially arrived. The heavy double doors of the grand ballroom burst open with a terrifying, violent force. Over 24 federal agents stormed into the venue. They wore dark tactical windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI printed boldly across their backs. The chaotic shouting of the press reporters was instantly drowned out by the harsh commanding voices of the federal authorities ordering everyone to step back and clear the center aisle. The wealthy campaign donors and powerful real estate developers who had been eagerly writing massive checks to Darius just an hour ago now scrambled desperately to get out of the way. They pressed their bodies flat against the massive glass walls of the aquarium, terrified of being caught in the crossfire of a federal raid. Special Agent Thomas walked straight through the parted sea of panicked elites. He did not look left or right. He kept his sharp gray eyes locked entirely on the stage. I stood at the bottom of the stage steps, waiting for him with perfect calm. As he approached, I unclasped my sleek black clutch and reached inside. I pulled out a small encrypted silver flash drive and held it out to him. The final Cayman Island routing numbers. I said, my voice steady and clear amid the surrounding chaos. The initial public offering executed flawlessly this morning. The stolen offshore funds have officially vested into his primary domestic accounts. I initiated my spousal freeze on my lawful 50% at exactly 6 o'clock. The remaining $30 million in his accounts is completely trapped and ready for immediate federal seizure. Agent Thomas took the silver flash drive and slipped it securely into his tactical pocket. He offered me a single brief nod of profound professional respect. "Excellent work, Nia," he replied. He turned his head toward the heavily armed agents fanning out across the ballroom and raised his right hand, giving the final tactical signal. "Take him down." 6 federal agents instantly rushed the wooden stage. Darius watched them coming with wide, terrified eyes. His arrogant political facade completely crumbled, leaving behind nothing but a pathetic, frightened criminal. He took a frantic step backward, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. "Wait!" Darius yelled, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal. "This is a massive misunderstanding. I am a city councilman. I am running for mayor. You cannot do this to me. I have highly paid lawyers." The federal agents did not care about his political title or his empty threats. 2 massive agents grabbed him by the shoulders, spun him around violently, and slammed him face first against the hard, clear acrylic podium. The heavy impact knocked the wind completely out of his lungs. His expensive, custom-tailored suit jacket bunched up awkwardly around his neck as they aggressively pulled his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around his wrists echoed sharply into the microphone still resting on the floor nearby. "Darius Vance, you are under arrest for international wire fraud, political corruption, and severe money laundering," Agent Thomas announced, projecting his authoritative voice so the entire press section could record the official charges. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a federal court of law." Darius squirmed against the tight grip of the agents. His face was pressed hard against the podium, but he managed to turn his head sideways to look down at me. His eyes were entirely bloodshot, filled with panicked, desperate tears. "Nia," he begged, his voice trembling with sheer terror. "Nia, please help me. Call your auditing firm. Call the best defense lawyers in the city. Tell them I did not know about the offshore accounts. Tell them it was my campaign manager. Please, you have to fix this. I am your husband." I slowly walked up the carpeted stairs to the stage. The federal agents saw me approaching, but Agent Thomas held up his hands silently, instructing them to let me pass. I walked right up to the podium and looked down at the pathetic man pinned against the acrylic surface. He was sweating profusely, and his breathing was ragged and shallow. I reached out with a perfectly steady hand. I did not strike him. I did not yell at him. I gently took hold of his crooked blue silk tie, the exact same tie I had told him to pack for his romantic getaway with Chloe, and slowly straightened it. I carefully smoothed down the wrinkled collar of his expensive shirt, making sure he looked absolutely picture-perfect for his upcoming mugshot. "I told you exactly 90 days ago, Darius," I said, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm and remarkably cold. "I am a senior corporate auditor. We do not get mad. We do not throw screaming tantrums or cry over broken vows. We simply balance the books. And your account is entirely overdrawn." Darius let out a pathetic, whimpering sob, finally realizing that I had never forgiven him. I had been methodically building his gallows right in front of his face for 3 solid months, and he had gladly tied the noose around his own neck. I turned my back on my ruined husband and walked gracefully down the stage stairs. Down on the marble floor, the chaos was still completely unfolding. The federal agents were systematically securing the massive ballroom, locking down the exits to ensure no accomplices could escape the venue. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted 2 very familiar figures trying to slip away unnoticed. Keisha and Trey were actively crawling on their hands and knees behind a row of lavish catering tables, desperately trying to reach the heavy metal doors of the kitchen service exit. They had completely abandoned their arrogant VIP attitudes. Keisha had even ripped off her massive, extravagant church hat and thrown it under a table so she could move faster. They knew their names were deeply entangled in their brother's fraudulent finances, and they were terrified of being dragged away in federal handcuffs. I altered my path and walked briskly across the polished marble floor, cutting off their escape route. I stepped right in front of the kitchen doors, crossing my arms and looking down at the two pathetic parasites. Going somewhere so soon, I asked, raising a single eyebrow. The launch party is just getting to the best part. Keisha scrambled up from the floor, desperately trying to brush the dirt off her heavily sequined dress. She looked absolutely terrified. "Get out of our way, Nia," she hissed, her voice shaking wildly. "We have absolutely nothing to do with his illegal money. We did not know he was laundering campaign funds. You cannot let them arrest us." Trey stood up behind her, nervously wiping sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, Nia. Tell the agents we are innocent. We just live with him. We do not know anything about his business." "You are absolutely right," I replied smoothly. "You do not know anything about his business. Because he has absolutely no business left. And speaking of where you live, I thought you might want to see a quick update regarding your current residential status." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my cell phone. I unlocked the screen and opened the live security camera application, connected directly to my massive house in Buckhead. I turned the bright screen around and held it up right in front of Keisha's panicked face. The high-definition live video feed showed the front lawn of my property, but it was not quiet or peaceful. A massive moving truck was parked directly in the driveway. 6 large burly men wearing heavy work boots were actively carrying Keisha and Trey's cheap cardboard boxes and throwing them violently onto the front grass. "What are they doing?" Keisha shrieked, staring at the small screen in absolute horror. "Those are my things. That is my designer wardrobe." "You spent the entire morning packing your boxes to move into his luxury campaign penthouse," I reminded her coldly. "But since the federal government just seized that penthouse, along with every other asset your brother fraudulently acquired, you officially have nowhere to go. So I hired a private eviction crew to immediately clear my property of all your remaining garbage." On the live screen, one of the movers picked up a large, heavy box clearly labeled with Trey's name and tossed it carelessly onto the lawn. The box burst open upon impact, spilling his fake designer sneakers and cheap cologne bottles all over the wet grass. Suddenly, the automatic lawn sprinklers activated, spraying high-pressure water directly onto their scattered belongings. Trey let out a loud groan of pure agony, watching his entire life getting completely soaked. "You are a monster!" Keisha screamed, lunging forward slightly before catching herself, terrified that a federal agent might hear her. "You planned this whole thing. You took away my credit cards, you foreclosed my townhouse, and now you are throwing me on the streets." "I told you on Sunday at the dinner table," I whispered, stepping incredibly close to her so she could feel the absolute chill radiating from my voice. "You started a family war you could not possibly win. Now get out of my sight before I tell Agent Thomas to review the fraudulent tax returns you filed for your fake hair company." Keisha gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. The fight completely drained out of her body. She grabbed Trey by the arm and they practically ran toward the side exit, pushing past a group of confused waiters. They were running out into the dark Atlanta night with absolutely $0 in their bank accounts, no cars to drive, and nowhere to sleep. They were completely and utterly ruined. I turned back toward the center of the grand ballroom to witness the grand finale of my 90-day audit. The heavy double doors of the main entrance were propped wide open. The federal agents aggressively hauled Darius off the wooden stage. He was no longer fighting them. His head hung low, his shoulders slumped in absolute agonizing defeat. They frog-marched him right down the center aisle. The press section absolutely swarmed him. Dozens of bright camera flashes exploded in his face, immortalizing his humiliating downfall for the front pages of every major newspaper in the country. He squinted against the blinding lights, a disgraced broken criminal being dragged out in handcuffs. As they hauled him past the VIP section, he did not even look down, but I did. Chloe was still collapsed on the cold marble floor. The stark white designer dress she had worn to celebrate her victory was completely soaked in spilled wine and dirty water. She was hugging her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth and sobbing uncontrollably. Her billionaire husband had legally saddled her with $20 million of toxic corporate debt, and the man who promised to save her was currently being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle. Through the massive glass walls of the aquarium, the bright flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers reflected violently against the dark water, illuminating the absolute wreckage of their lives. 1 week later, the absolute silence inside my Buckhead home was nothing short of glorious. There were no heavy footsteps pacing nervously down the hallway. There were no arrogant sisters dragging moving boxes across my polished hardwood floors. There were no lies hanging in the air. There was only peace. The kind of deep, unshakable peace that comes from a perfectly balanced ledger. I sat comfortably on my white leather sofa, holding a warm mug of jasmine tea. The morning sunlight streamed through the large bay windows, illuminating the pristine, immaculate living room. I picked up the silver remote control and turned on the television, tuning into the local Atlanta news station. For the past 7 days, my estranged husband had been the absolute center of every single broadcast. Today was no different. The news anchor appeared on the screen wearing a serious expression. A massive graphic reading "City Hall Scandal" hovered over her left shoulder. Next to the bold red letters was a deeply unflattering mugshot of Darius, the arrogant, charming politician who had stood on that bright aquarium stage just 1 week ago. Was completely gone. In the photograph, his face was pale, his eyes were completely hollow, and he was wearing a standard-issue orange federal jumpsuit. The anchor read the breaking update with professional detachment. Disgraced former city councilman Darius Vance has officially been denied bail by a federal judge this morning, facing a massive 47-count indictment, including international wire fraud, severe money laundering, and political corruption. Vance is currently looking at a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The Federal Bureau of Investigation confirmed that the $30 million held in offshore Cayman Island accounts has been successfully seized and returned to the city of Atlanta. I took a slow sip of my tea, watching his ruined face disappear from the screen. 15 years behind thick steel bars. A fitting conclusion for a man who thought he could steal from his city and his wife without consequence. But Darius was not the only one paying a massive, irreversible price for his arrogance. The collateral damage of my 90-day audit had swept through his parasitic family like a violent financial hurricane. Keisha and Trey were completely erased from my life, but I still knew exactly where they ended up. After my private security team tossed their cheap belongings onto the wet lawn, they had absolutely nowhere to go. Keisha's fraudulent luxury hair company had been completely dismantled by the Internal Revenue Service, just as I promised. All of her fake assets were frozen and seized. The bank had officially foreclosed on the townhouse I used to pay for. Today, the woman who used to carry a pale pink Prada bag and demand my car keys is working the drive-through window at a cheap fast food restaurant on the gritty outskirts of the city. She wears a polyester uniform and smells permanently like stale frying grease. Trey, the brilliant entrepreneur who refused to drive his Honda without my money, is currently sweeping the concrete floors of a massive discount shipping warehouse, working grueling 12-hour night shifts just to survive. They pool their minimum wage paychecks to afford a cramped, moldy room in a rundown roadside motel. They have absolutely zero credit, no safety net, and nobody left to manipulate. And then there is Chloe, the beautiful, flashy socialite who thought she had successfully stolen my life. Sterling was a billionaire who operated with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. The morning after the gala disaster, his massive legal team descended upon Chloe like a pack of starving wolves. She was violently evicted from her Buckhead mansion before noon. The $50 million divorce settlement was permanently legally terminated. But the true horror of her situation was the toxic debt portfolio. The $20 million Sterling had legally transferred into her name was an absolute financial death sentence. She immediately tried to file for emergency bankruptcy, but the corporate morality clause she had signed years ago made the debt completely unshakable. Her wealthy high society friends blocked her phone number, instantly terrified of angering Sterling. The designer boutiques she used to frequent banned her from the premises. Chloe, the woman who had intentionally spilled red wine on my dress and mocked my corporate salary, is now completely destitute. Her socialite status is destroyed forever. She is drowning in an ocean of aggressive collection calls, facing decades of wage garnishments with absolutely no way out. She played a petty game with a billionaire and a senior auditor, and she lost absolutely everything. Suddenly, a sharp, bright chime cut through the quiet living room. I set my teacup down on the glass table and picked up my cell phone. A secure notification banner flashed across the screen from my primary banking institution. I swiped the screen and opened the highly encrypted portal. The deposit had officially cleared. Sterling's massive $10 million consulting retainer had successfully passed through every single rigorous corporate auditing check. It was fully taxed, perfectly documented, and completely legally binding. The money sat firmly in my account, a massive permanent reward for my flawless 90-day performance. Right below the bank notification, a second message popped up. It was an email from my high-powered divorce attorney. I opened the message and read the final legal decree. Because I was entirely cleared of any wrongdoing by the federal authorities, and because my spousal freeze had been executed perfectly prior to the raid, the city courts had officially processed the forfeiture of Darius's remaining legitimate assets. The judge recognized my extensive cooperation with the federal investigation and awarded me full absolute control over the liquidated properties, adding millions more to my totally secure blind trust. I locked my phone screen and tossed it casually onto the sofa. I stood up from the white leather couch and walked over to the large bay window. I looked out at the bright green manicured lawn, breathing in the absolute freedom of my brand new life. I had walked through a blazing fire of betrayal and emerged with an empire. I turned away from the window and looked directly forward, making absolute unwavering eye contact. People think the loudest woman in the room is the strongest. They think the woman who screams, throws plates, and causes a massive public scene is the one holding all the power. But real power is moving in absolute silence. It is keeping your face completely still while your mind calculates the exact trajectory of their destruction. It is letting your enemies enthusiastically dig their own graves because they are entirely too arrogant to actually check the math. You do not need to raise your voice to win a war. You just need to control the ledger. Family or not, husband or stranger, if you try to steal my hard-earned peace, I promise you I will entirely bankrupt yours. Have you ever had to smile politely in the face of absolute betrayal while quietly and methodically planning your brilliant exit? How long did you wait before you finally sprung the trap? Let me know your story in the comments below. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and remember one very important rule. Never under any circumstances mess with the woman who handles the spreadsheets.